Coming to us live via technology from the other side of the continent, David Pakman, ladies and gentlemen.
So good to be back with you.
Good to be with you, too. And I love your facial hair, as I was saying before. I say stick with it all the way. Maybe get some kind of a cult leader, guru thing happening.
I'm actually 5 days from a man bun, and I wanted to see what you thought about that.
The man bun's the starter kit for a cult leader, right? The man bun is like, I'm trying to get people to listen to me more and take me more seriously. I'm spiritual.
I need like a gimmick of some kind.
I think your gimmick is just being a nice guy and smart. How about that? That's rare.
To a fault. Nice to a fault is the new thing.
You're nice to a fault?
I don't know. I get emails from people who are like, you don't have to kowtow to the dumb part of your audience. Like, you don't have to say stuff like, listen, I want to apologize in advance for using a slightly off-color phrase, but people are like, you just shouldn't do that. It's better for the show for you just to say the thing.
I love that you listen to those people. I think you should be yourself. And if you feel like you need to say that, I feel like you should just say that. It's nothing wrong with it. It doesn't hurt my feelings when you say things like that. You know, even if I understand what you're doing, it's no big deal. I feel like there's too many opinions, and it sucks for the people with opinions. And I think it's one of the problems with what we do, and one of the reasons why people get so angry at us. So if you and I are having a conversation, and we maybe perhaps we agree on something, but someone listening is like, fuck that, this is what's wrong with that idea, and they want to say it, but they can't. So the comments are almost inherently angry because it's really so much of it is just people who want to say something, but there's no forum for them. They only can say it in the comments. They can't. They feel like they're in on this conversation that they want to jump in on and interject.
Well, I got an email today from someone who said, I love everything you've been doing for the last 6 years, but yesterday you used the word anti-vaxxer. And I just, that's it. That was it. When you used that word, that was it for the David Pakman Show. And it's like, you can't win with that. You can't win, you know?
But it's the same thing. It's like they're angry, right? And this is the way to get you to listen. Like, oh, you're leaving? Wait a minute. They're being completely unreasonable. Can you imagine if there was a show that you enjoy and the guy said one thing that you disagreed with? And it's especially something like calling someone an anti-vaxxer and you're like, fuck this. It's over. My relationship with you is over. That purity standard is impossible to achieve, especially when you're doing something like what you and I do, where we're basically just talking with I'm sure you have like some bullet points of things you want to cover, but you're ad-libbing all the time. You're what we call freeballing all the time, and it's a crazy standard to try to hold, to ask someone to not say anything that you're going to disagree with. Or I say things I disagree with. You know, I'll listen to it a half hour later, or I'll think about it a day later. I'm like, why did I even say it like that? I have
videos from 7 years ago where, it's not that my foundational values haven't changed, but I do look at it and I say, if I had known then what was going to happen 4 months later, I never would have done it that particular way.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that happen in the news that force you to sort of shift your opinions and go, oh, that kind of stuff does happen. Oh, I've been naive. I've had this perception of, whether it's the government or the intelligence agencies, of being like beyond reproach. And now I find out, oh, all right, now I got to go and revisit a lot of things that I was saying were nonsense, a lot of things that I was dismissing openly. Now I got to go, oh, well, we like to think that when it comes to like governments and intelligence agencies, we'd like to think that there's some level of whether it's government or military, there's some place that you could reach where you're like a super person, where you're not going to make any of the mistakes that we'd attribute to people based on greed or ego or pettiness or short-sightedness, that when you get to that point, you're a proven commodity and that you're what we're looking for as a leader. And you have to be upheld, you have to uphold these very strict standards at that spot. And we assume that there is an actual thing like that. And I think it's one of the reasons why people get so frustrated at Trump is because he doesn't even try to pretend he's one of those things. He behaves the same way he used to.
Well, one of the things that I was kind of in a battle with my audience during the primary was I would get emails from people who would say, the only person who can beat Trump is Bernie, for example. And then I would get people who would say, the only person who could beat Trump is Tulsi Gabbard. Everybody else is straight up a bad person. And my message was always, listen, we shouldn't deify any of these people. These are just people. You've met a lot of them. They've been in your studio. We're just talking about people. You're not going to agree with them on every policy position. You're not going to agree with everything they've done personally. And where I think it gets dicey is where they start movements. It's a cult of personality, really, where a movement is built around the person as an idea, and they can do no wrong. And that's where there's no way to talk those folks down about issues or about practical decisions that we have to make.
No, I think you're 100% right. And I also think that the position itself, the world has grown too large for the position. I feel like if we left from all parts of the land and all parts of the world and found an empty continent. Well, obviously, the United States wasn't really empty. But if we found a place where we resettled and we tried to restructure government from scratch, we would take that into consideration now. I think our founding fathers, they were just dealing with this archetypal structure of one person that sort of runs things, but in this case, it would be a person that we all agreed to, and it was a much better step moving forward than kings, right? But I think now that we've kind of done that for a while, we realize, well, yeah, that might be great when it's 100,000 people or 1 million people. But once it gets to 320 million people and complicated things like international business and like trade agreements and the environment and nuclear power versus solar and wind, and like one person is going to be responsible for all these insanely important decisions, that seems crazy. And to blame one person when any one thing goes wrong seems crazy as well. It's just, I don't think we would do it this way. I think we would have some sort of a council of wise people or something along those lines.
You know what's interesting to me about that? I mean, we're like diving headfirst right into a bunch of stuff here. But what's interesting about that is when you think about who to vote for president, and I know that we'll get into this stuff, I'm sure. You're not just voting for the person, you're voting for who are they likely to have working for them, right. What is likely to happen in courts, what is likely to happen regulation-wise. And so, of course, you want to think about who it is that the person is, but you also want to think about who do they bring with them. And for me, that's a lot of how I see voting in November at this point.
Yeah, most people have made that concession. And it's an interesting concession, right? Because it's not a concession we had to make. If it was Tulsi Gabbard or Bernie Sanders or Amy Klobuchar or Pete Buttigieg or, go down the line, there's a lot of very credible candidates that would have made interest, like maybe this person could be the next great president. Maybe this person could be a great leader. But now we're in this position, we're like, oh, God, okay. So listen, we're voting for the cabinet. We're like Biden is so he's whether or not he's having moments that are related to cognitive decline, which you could speculate, or whether or not this is just his reaction to the most extreme amount of pressure he's ever faced in his life. And that does happen with people. We know people lock up. I would imagine that a guy who's been in the spotlight as long as he has for so long probably would be able to handle stuff, but I think running for president is a whole different ballgame. I think everything gets turned up by 10, and I think it gets turned up in this society that we're experiencing today. It gets turned up even more so because of social media. Like no president other than Trump has really had to deal with this kind of wave of social viral, feedback online with Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and all the stuff that we're experiencing right now. Obama didn't have to deal with that really in his first term, maybe a little bit in his second term, but then Trump's the first guy to tackle it head on. And he's, in a lot of ways, he's showing you what can come at you. And I think that when Biden is running through these steps to try to become president, he's experiencing a wave of attention and scrutiny that he's never experienced before. And that could also exacerbate. What am I, a doctor here? I'm trying to figure out what's wrong with his head. But that could also exacerbate.
Have you taken a position on the Biden cognitive stuff that's
Something's wrong. Something's wrong. If he was my friend and he was fighting, I'd ask him to retire. I mean, if I'm looking at it that way. I have friends that I've seen their cognitive decline from fighting. I'm not saying that Biden's the same because I don't really know him from, I don't know him over a long period of time. I don't know him at all personally, but something's wrong. The way
are any of your friends are they close to 80? Any of them?
No.
Okay.
The guys who experiencing cognitive decline are younger guys who've been hit in the head. When you get to 80, I have known people that have had problems, and it's very unfortunate. I don't think he's there because you could still talk to him. Like if that was just a guy that you knew, and he was like, and he said something like, "We've all been endowed by the thing." That one famous you wouldn't say, "Oh Jesus, what's going on with Ray?" You would say, "Oh, he locked up. He had a brain fart. He had a mental lapse," which I've had doing podcasts all the time. It can happen. But in that moment, in front of those people, to do it that way while he's running for president and while he's had a few of those before, you could be dealing with anxiety too. There's probably a lot of shit going on, but I would be concerned.
Yeah, I mean, listen, so I don't have any, my view is just based on actual professionals that I've talked to and people that have been in a room with him, because I'm not a professional and I've not been in the room with Biden. So Andrew Yang was on with Sam Harris recently. I don't know if you saw it. And this topic came up. And Andrew Yang basically said, listen, he's 78 years old. If you compare a video of Biden debating Paul Ryan in 2012 to Biden a month ago, obviously it's different. And to some degree, that's normal when someone's 78 years old.
Yeah.
But Andrew Yang's perspective was that he didn't see anything that he would call dementia or cognitive decline beyond that. So that's like it's just one data point. It doesn't tell us anything definitively, The other thing is I've interviewed a few people, and I think you and I maybe have even messaged about some of them, neurologists and mental health professionals who are very concerned about Trump, like the oranges of an investigation, where he seems to sort of like lock up when his shoulders sort of, this thing that he does where his shoulders kind of lock up in a weird way.
I haven't seen
there's
that.
a few of those, yeah. I got video of that. He
so
walks
that could
off
just
of
be
his
an injury.
plane.
You think it's a neurological thing?
I don't know. That's the thing. So it could be neurological, mental health, side effect of medication. There's a whole bunch of stuff it could be.
Could it also be an injury?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I mean, if he's doing something with his back or his shoulder?
Well, it's weird because when it happens, he has a verbal mistake that he makes, and it coincides with this shoulder thing. And then it's almost like there's a half-second gap, and then someone hits the reset button, and he'll get back on the teleprompter or whatever. It's weird. There's like 10 or so examples.
I need to see this. I need to see this while I'm talking to you. So Jamie's going to search for one. So what would he search for?
I think if you went to like search.twitter.com and just searched in videos the way you can do, and you put like Trump brain glitch, I'm guessing that some of these would come up. But the gist of what I was getting to was some of these same neurologists and mental health folks, when I asked them privately about Biden and say, are you seeing like the same type of thing? They all say no. So again, it's like they're not
Democrats.
my view.
They're hardcore Democrats.
So. I don't know if that's.
Wait, come on, man. He's had these moments where, for sure, something doesn't look good, right?
I agree. Totally agree.
So why would they say any differently? They've got to be Democrats. They got to be hardcore party loyalists.
I think that to assume that absent any evidence is maybe unfair.
Yeah, it is. But I'm an unfair guy in some respects.
But here's my thought on this right now. So, like, let's imagine that Biden's having a problem, right?
Okay.
Let's imagine it's absolutely for real. I'm still voting for him over Trump, right? I mean, like, so I think last time we talked, you mentioned you were pro-choice. Do I remember that right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So
I am, but I feel like it's a controversial subject for a reason.
Fair.
Yeah.
If Donald Trump gets to pick the next Supreme Court justice, it will be someone who would love to overturn Roe v. Wade. I mean, there's not even a chance. He said it, right?
This is what Trump has said, that he is pro-life and that he would pick someone that would, or it was just by virtue of picking conservative.
There's two parts to it. One is Donald Trump was pro-choice almost his entire life. He became pro-life when he was, I think, 68 because he met a kid he liked. And he imagined if that kid wasn't born. No, I'm serious.
I believe you. It's just hilarious.
It's crazy.
It's like an ABC after-school special.
Let's imagine that that's true, that he had an awakening at age 68 after being pro-life his whole life.
Yeah.
He said he would pick justices that were recommended to him by, I forget which conservative group. You're only going to get, so-called pro-life justices from these groups.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, Joe Biden will absolutely pick a pro-choice justice. So if I was pro-choice like you are, how do I justify voting for the guy who's going to replace potentially Ruth Bader Ginsburg with someone who would want Roe v. Wade overturned? Like, I couldn't do it in good conscience.
That's a good point. Well, I'm going to get into it in a second, but Jamie just pulled up this video of Trump, and I'm going to get to watch him have this weird twitch for the first time. Go ahead, hit me with it, Jamie. Okay, so he's talking. I'm watching it. Is that it? That little move that he made? One of them, I guess. Oh, this is hilariously silly. Trump neurologically malfunctions with a full spasm. No, he's talking and he just went like this. People do that. That's silly. Maybe it's that video is silly.
There's a dozen of. Yeah, I don't know. I couldn't hear that.
I think a better thing is something that you showed me on your show. A better example, when there was real problems with him enunciating words. And, there was speculation like, was he falling? Was he sick? Was he on a sedative? Was something going wrong? It almost seemed like his tongue wasn't working correctly, right?
Yeah,
like he was wrestling with a paralyzed tongue. Like
your perspective matches mine, but I think for me, it's like this stuff. We're not probably ever going to really get an answer to this, and I don't know that it's imperative to know the answers for me to know who it is I'm going to vote for, I guess, is the point I'm trying to make.
It's fascinating that pro-choice is such a hard-line issue on left-wing people and right-wing people. It really is that it's this line in the sand, and people are willing to they're willing to make concessions in favor of going in that direction because they recognize the slippery slope of limiting people's rights and the dangers of going in the other direction. You're not going to stop abortions. You're just going to stop legal abortions. It's going to be very dangerous for the women. It's going to be, it's almost, it's almost a black and white issue in that regard. But what's not a black and white issue is abortion itself, right? Like there's a time in the baby's life or the fetus when it's inside the woman where everyone gets uncomfortable, whether it's 5 months in, 4 months in, 3, whatever it is for you, where you're like, oh Jesus, that's a baby now. And to deny that, I think is very odd. That's a weird thing that we do because it's so uncomfortable. What it is so uncomfortable. It bothers us so much that we just draw these lines, and we've got this opinion in a box, and it's this and this. Here we go. We got this bulletproof right-wing box, and you can never have an abortion. Okay, well, what if your daughter gets raped by some robber? You think that your daughter should have to carry this man's child? Like if they know about it immediately when it's a bundle of cells? Really? You think that? Like that to me is insane. And
right. Now, if you knew that it was conceivable that Trump would put someone on the court who has that view, that'd be pretty scary, wouldn't it?
Well, it's scary in a lot of ways. I think the more control government has over your body and the more it can dictate what you can and can't do, the scary things get. And then it gets scary in that this is a subject that, it's so polarizing. And if you move in the direction of limiting it, you run the risk, I always feel, of shifting even like the consciousness of the public, shifting the way people approach things like this, accepting control, that the government has control over your body. As like one of the, the idea that they can come and decide what you have to do for the rest of your life now based on maybe something that wasn't even your choice. That to me is crazy. But that's not the only thing that's going on. There's so many other issues. It's one of the reasons why picking a president and picking a party is it's so crazy that we let one person and then his group that he gets with him shift the consciousness of the public or shift the direction of the country one way or the other. It's a really weird choice that we make in even making a president, and in doing it every 4 years, and having all these checks and balances that you have to follow. I mean, I think it's a great system for the time when they invented it. It's amazing how well it holds up from 1776 to today. It's incredible. It shows you how amazingly wise they were. But just think about what we know now in 2020 about just the nature of communication, like what you and I are doing. I mean, this is going to affect millions of people and their opinions. If you knew that today in 2020 and someone asked you to make rules based on what was going to be in place 300 years from now, you would be like, I'm not qualified to do that. It's incredible how well they wrote the Constitution and the Bill of Rights back then. I mean, it's one of the most amazing things ever if you really think about like all the different times that it's come up, and then you think about how long it's been that it was created. I mean, it's really an astounding piece of human work.
It is. Your argument, though, is really one for having to update the infrastructure that we right? So, like, as you're saying, if in order to change the way that we govern the country, as you're saying, one person making all these decisions with all of these different areas that they're responsible for, if you want to change that, you do have to change that document that you just said.
I know. It's kind of crazy, right? It's like we don't want to update Windows 95. Like, I'm comfortable with it. I know where the icons are. But Windows 10's like, hey, come make the switch. We've got a better system. We figured it out better. We don't have a Windows 10 of government. We're still working with 95. We still have the older versions of Apple's software. We don't have OS X 10, whatever the latest version of it is. We are in this weird place where we have this system that's better than anything that we could see anywhere else, but yet it doesn't necessarily work perfectly for the complicated issues that exist in managing just the 330 million people and all their problems.
What is your sense of, is there a particular issue where when you think of Trump and Biden, you're on the Trump side in terms of the political position?
Like what political positions? See, my opinions on political positions, especially like the really scary ones, right? Like the possibility of war, the environment, things along those lines. I wish I was more informed. I wish I knew exactly, like when there's some negotiations in these trade war deals with China, for instance, like I wish I understood that better. I wish I really knew what was at stake and what China's actually trying to do, and whether or not, like in particular, like when you think about China and the military and their engagement with the companies, the reason why, like I never understood why they were trying to keep Huawei out. I was like, why do they keep? That doesn't make any sense to me. Like, shouldn't they show that they've done something bad? But it's a company that they feel is inexorably connected to the Chinese government. So that's like negotiating with them and that kind of, like, for me to say that I think that this person's doing a better job, or I like the way Biden would handle it better, like, do I really know what the fuck I'm talking about? I don't. I really don't.
Yeah. Well,
and that's the case with a lot of issues. I mean, social issues,
I
think.
That's what I was going to say. I feel like there's low-hanging fruit where just from listening to you, it's like, when you said that you were mostly sort of a Bernie guy, that in the primary you seem to, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that Bernie would be your primary, the person in the primary that you would lean towards or support. If you pick environment, just for one example, Bernie's big on Green New Deal, and we could debate how practical is it? Is it just a framework? Is it something that could literally be made law, or whatever the case? Trump thinks climate change was a hoax created by China, whereas Biden supports the Green New Deal as a framework. It's like, if we start with Bernie, you can see that there's a Grand Canyon-sized gap between the two options. And so that's where I'm kind of interested in, because, I'm sure, I don't know if you see them or not, but there's all these articles about Joe Rogan is left, right, center, whatever. You and I have spoken enough now where you've made it clear that your actual positions on social issues, environment, they're pretty left. And they're even said, Bernie is really who aligns with me. Okay, Biden is not Bernie for sure, but it's closer. And so that's where I'm interested in, whether there's really anything you can identify where you're like, I just don't agree with Biden on this.
Well, when you talk about Bernie and why I was interested in Bernie, what Bernie represented to me was someone who wanted change at a societal level, wanted to help people in a way that wasn't going to make anybody any money. It wasn't something where he was clearly doing this because of the special interest groups that put him in a position, think that this would ultimately be more profitable. When he's talking about things like eliminating student loans, and making school free for everyone, when you say that, I go, first of all, that's not making anybody any money, right? That's one of those things you're only doing because you think it would be better for humans, better for our culture, better for our civilization. I'm all for that. Those are the things. Eliminating these catastrophic healthcare bills that people get when they get sick and they go bankrupt. That to me is crazy that we have this community. That's what it's supposed to be, right? The United States is supposed to be almost like a giant team. And we would let others, just by simple misfortune, we would let their life completely fall apart because they got injured, and they come up with this bill that literally changes the whole course of their life. If you're a person who makes $50,000 a year and you're doing fine, and then all of a sudden a catastrophic injury comes along and you get hit with a medical bill that's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, you're fucked. Like your life, you don't have enough time to make that up unless you do something significantly different in terms of earning more money. So you're stuck. And you're in a
That's it.
That's to me crazy. And that doesn't make any sense. Like, as a person who values community, as a person who values, we can help, and it makes everybody feel good. If you can help someone who came upon some bad fortune, they feel better. They feel protected and loved. You feel better for being able to use your privilege or your fortune to help these people. That's what we need more of. That is what stood out for me about Bernie Sanders. Now, the argument against that is the pro-business argument, right? The pro-business argument is the stronger the business is, the better business does. There's a trickle-down effect, and the whole society will rise up because the economy is stronger. And there's going to be some ruthless capitalism going on, but ultimately it benefits everybody. And I don't think you have to have one or the other there. I mean, I don't think that these are mutually exclusive. That you can have capitalism, but you could also have compassion, and we could work together as a community, and try to take all these problems that we have that are really clear, right? Like these inner cities that never get any better, they never show any improvement unless they get gentrified. Everything stays fucked, right? Why is that? That's not an unsurmountable problem. Like, if we can fly across the planet and try to fix countries that we've blown up in war, why can't we try to fix the inner cities that our kids go to school in? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me, that people are forced to live in. That's why I was interested in Bernie Sanders. That's what he means to me.
The healthcare example is an interesting one because it really comes down to what is the main point of the healthcare apparatus, right? If the main point is to get people as healthy as possible so that they can live the longest, most fulfilling lives that they want or are able to, that gets you one set of policies. If the perspective is healthcare is just an industry like any other, where the participants just are there to make money, that's a totally different policy prescription and regulatory infrastructure. It's night and day.
Yeah, it really is. It really is night and day. And it's one of those things that I think people are probably going to be more interested in hearing about now after this pandemic. And they realize, hey, through no fault of your own, you could be broke. Through no fault of your own, you can lose your business. Through no fault of your own. So all these ideas that, like, I know people that are pretty right-wing that would give me a hard time about, call me a socialist and a commie because I'm really into Bernie Sanders. A lot of those very same people are now wanting to get that stimulus check. A lot of those very same people are now understanding why I supported Andrew Yang and his concept of universal basic income, because his concept is based on his understanding of technology and his knowledge of AI and the potential possibility to just take millions of people out of the market, out of the workplace, like that. Almost like this, like a virus of technology that removes removes jobs instead of removes your health. And I think that more people probably would be better off if we shifted our ideas about what socialism means and what democratic socialism means. I think the word is so toxic. Maybe we should just call it community support. That we should think of these really key things like student loans. I think we both agree about this. It is insane to start your life at 22 years old, just getting out of school with hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. That's insane. And if you go on to get a PhD, it keeps going. It keeps going. And you get to this point where you have this weight over you. Everywhere you go, there's this big ass weight and you're carrying it around. And you're carrying around this debt that even if you go bankrupt, you have to pay. How did that happen? How are businesses able to pollute the environment, make terrible mistakes, go under, go bankrupt, and they're absolved of their debt? But a kid who wanted to learn something goes to a school and winds up, you're 22, you're not even a fully formed human yet, and you're in debt. You're fucked. You're starting out of the gate crazy behind the line.
Well, you're completely right, of course, about the toxic nature of the word socialism. Just to go back to that for a second, I think that hurt Bernie. In 2015, I was saying Bernie may well have been a socialist in the 1970s. He may still be one, but he's really running on social democracy, which is what they have in Northern Europe. It's a type of capitalism, and this is what I think Andrew Yang actually did well. I don't know if it was like people-centered capitalism that he called what he was doing or what phrase he used. But I do think in my postmortems about what happened with Bernie, because it wasn't by a little bit that Bernie lost. I mean, even before he dropped out, he was down like 1.8 or 2 million votes to Joe Biden. Like this was really not close. I do think that the continued use of that word socialism was not helpful. And I know people will hear me say this and they'll say, David, either way, they were going to call him a socialist. What difference does it make if he embraces the term or says it's not the right term or whatever? Sure, that applies to some people, but I fail to see what the advantage was to using a term that didn't really describe what his campaign was. He's talking about capitalism where you say, like you're pointing out, we can't let people drop too low. We need to ensure some basic level things happen that aren't people's fault. It's not just about you're going to do as well as you want to do. There are circumstances people are born into, injuries, pandemics, all this stuff.
Yes.
So I do think that whatever your opinion is about socialism, quote unquote, there was really no advantage to Bernie Sanders from using or at least to some degree allowing that term to continue being used.
Well, he wanted to redefine it. And when he came onto my show, he actually did try to define it and describe the difference between the concept of socialism, which a lot of people connect to communism, and what he calls democratic socialism. And what he was showing a more tamed down version of this concept that, a lot of like real young lefties, like my friend Bridget was on the podcast the other day. Bridget Fetisi, she's a hilarious writer, very funny comedian. And she was talking about how she found some stuff that she wrote when she was in her early 20s, and she read it, and she's more center today, I would say, maybe left on many issues politically, socially rather, but she was like AOC. She said she's reading this stuff and she was like a radical when she was young. And I think that happens to people. I'm sure Bernie was probably a full-on socialist at one point in his life. But like, what did that mean back then versus what does it mean now? And even the term socialist, like the term, like when you look at the term conservative or the term socialist, you're talking about a spectrum. You're not talking about a 1 or a 0. You can't have no one has the same number factor of conservatism. There's a lot of people that are conservative that they're very liberal on a lot of social issues, but yet they still vote red. And I think there's a lot of people that consider themselves like a socialist, but what does that, at what level? If you're pro fire department, I think you embrace some socialist values, right? If you're pro a lot of the services that we use that are a part of your tax dollars, like we're combining our money so that the world is better for all of us. It's not just a dog-eat-dog fight. We recognize value in community and society and a civilization where we all work together. We just don't want to work together too much. We don't want people leeching off of it. And I'm on that side as well, because I know that although there are, and we're seeing these more than we've ever seen in our life, that multiple circumstances beyond your comprehension, totally out of your control, that fucks up your life. But yet we also see people who are lazy and who keep fucking up their life, and you keep enabling them and helping them. It doesn't help anybody either. Both those things are true. It does. Just because you agree with one thing, that we need to help each other, doesn't mean you deny the fact that there's a real problem psychologically to giving people free money and to giving people free room and board and taking away incentive for them to survive. There's something, for whatever reason, that a lot of us need, this sort of like inner drive, this knowledge that you're responsible for your own destiny, and you have to go out there and you have to put in the work. You have to get out of bed when the alarm goes off. You have to do the things you're supposed to do. And there's people that don't do that, and yet they still want to be rewarded. They still want money. They still want their check. They still want the thing they feel society or government owes them. That's not good either. See, both of those things are not good. It's not good to let people who are sick rot and live their life in a compromised position because they don't have enough money for the medical care. That's sick too. It's not a good person. It's not a good society. It's not a good model to have people starve. That's not good. If there's money and food and we could distribute it more evenly, especially to people that are unfortunate, but it's also not good to let people just camp out on the sidewalk where you can't walk through it. Los Angeles is filled with tents now, especially now because of all this craziness and the pandemic. It's gotten way worse. There's areas where you can't go anywhere. You literally can't walk under underpasses. There are these campgrounds. Like, that's not good either. You know, now we're dealing with mental health problems, I'm sure, and a lot of other issues.
Without getting into that, I mean, there's a lot. So, okay, you mentioned the areas where even right-wingers tend to be okay with sort of like socializing certain services. So fire department's an easy one. Who does the road? Those are all really easy. But I think that there's some more pernicious ones that the right is less eager to own. Like, for example, it's all about free market capitalism for profits, make a business, build up the business, et cetera, even when that business is built on law enforcement that's socialized to protect your offices, law infrastructure that you count on to protect your intellectual property. So put that aside for a second. But then they're okay socializing the cleanup or the fixing in many cases. So with drilling and fracking companies, for example.
Great examples.
Capitalism for the profits. Look at me, capitalist. I figured out how to do this drilling, how to extract this energy from the earth. I bought the land, I bought the equipment, I'm hiring employees. Look at me, pulling myself up by the bootstraps. Something goes wrong, people downwind, get sick, whatever. Now they are going to say, let's socialize that cleanup cost though, right? Because, we should do this through taxation. Let's make sure that we're cleaning this up at the state level. We want state funds to get this all cleaned up. So that is an area of hypocrisy that's more difficult than just like, we mostly all agree the fire department should be socialized. A few people will say, no, if you call and there's not really a fire, you should owe money. Or so that's like a tiny percentage. It's an easy one. The ones I'm talking about are a little bit tougher, and you're going to get a lot more pushback, I think, if you were to focus on those.
Well, I think you got a really good point with the environmental cleanup, like something like the BP oil spill. That's a really good point. And that's a weird one. It's like you don't want to, it's almost like it's such a catastrophic event. You don't want to leave it in the hands of someone who is so, they fucked up in the first place to make this happen. I don't trust them. I don't trust the way they do business. I mean, they maybe it's just something that happens when you drill under the ocean and you pull oil out. Occasionally things go wrong, but I don't want to trust them to fix that. I want to have some sort of environmental cleanup crew that's in place and maybe give them the bill. I mean, I don't know, what did it cost? How much did it cost BP to have that? And isn't it still leaking? Hasn't it been proven that it's still polluting the ocean?
I don't know. Over the last year, I honestly don't know what's going on.
Did you ever see the videos of when it was coming out of the ground?
Oh, yeah. It's crazy.
Like the world's ending. Like, it's
a high pressure. It's just open for days, right? I mean, months. I don't even remember how long it was, just open. But that's the point. If you don't, so this is where it starts to get tricky, because it sounds like you might trust them to monetize it. But then if it gets messed up, hey, we shouldn't trust them to clean it up. Someone else should do it, which maybe I agree with. And you're right, we should give them the bill. But that's the role of regulation to begin with. If they were better supervised, we could have prevented this from the start. I mean, with the BP oil spill, I'm going back like 10 years now, but there was some $500,000 valve, I believe, that was not required. I'm going from memory, so I hope I'm getting this 90% right. There was some regulation that was removed where they were no longer required to have this $500,000 safety on these rigs, which would have prevented it. And obviously the $500,000 they didn't want to spend up front, but it would have been way cheaper than what ultimately happened.
Jesus. You know, when I see those rigs outside, like there's a place that I love to go to in Santa Barbara that they have these offshore little oil rigs. I always look at them like that. One day in the future, we're going to look back and go, why the fuck did we ever let them put those there? That is so crazy. Any other business, like, first of all, that's not even our land, right? No one even owns that. It's like if you're an oil company and you're in Texas, you have to have either a lease on the land or you have to have rights to the land. It has to be yours in order to dig into the ground and get oil. But out there in the ocean, you're just kind of doing it on public area. You're doing it in the world. I mean, once you get a certain amount of miles, I forget how many miles it is offshore, it's international waters, right? So we're making agreements. We're letting these companies go into the ground and we're not profiting from it at all. All the money goes to them and they're sucking it out of the ocean. And at any moment, it could go wrong. It could be an explosion and the beaches are ruined for the rest of your generation.
Yeah,
like,
I couldn't agree with you more. I don't know if it's going to be like in 50 years or 200 years or, however many years. At some point, we're going to look back and there will be, the books will say, we used to pull this stuff out of the ground and then refine it and then burn it. And then and people would say, you guys did what? How did that work? How did you even get away with that?
Do you drive an electric car?
I don't currently,
you son
but
of a bitch.
Plan to get I have a lease which is up in 3 months.
Okay.
And the next car will be electric.
Yeah. Once you get one, other cars feel stupid. I mean, not just stupid because of the environmental risk. Like I have a Tesla Model S. It's the craziest thing I've ever driven. It literally doesn't make sense. They're so fast. It's like it's violating physics. It's so strange. It's like you see this enormous screen where the navigation's on. You're like, why did anybody ever have like a little screen when you can have one of these things? You know where you can see. It's like having a map open in front of you. They're incredible.
Now, do you if you do a long trip?
I don't bring it on a long trip.
Oh, you
I don't
just
trust it.
Okay.
Yeah,
I was going to say, are you planning ahead of time where you're stopping to charge it?
I have friends that have driven many, like across the country even with Teslas. And they there's a little supercharger map that's built in to the software. It's amazing. You can do it. But I don't want to wait around in some town for 20 minutes while my car charges to 80% and look around for weirdos. Like, what if some shit's going down, man? What if you're in, if you have like 14 miles left on your charge and all of a sudden a building explodes half a block away? Like, you got to get out of there. I like to be able to, if I'm taking a road trip and I'm going across the country, I want options. Maybe if they have like a little engine, they could get you by. Just a little tank of gas, a little engine to get you by in case you run out of batteries. It's going to be solar eventually.
You could also just always not go below 50%, right? And then you would know if the shit hits the fan, you've got 50% at least.
Yeah, you could do that. Yeah, you could do that, but that would be annoying. You drive, the 50% is like 150 miles. If you're on a long trip, you go to 150 miles and pull over, and then you got to wait there for whatever amount of time. They're getting better at it, though. They're getting faster. But the point is, like, it's such a clear leap in the evolution of technology that once you drive one of those, you're like, oh, it's game over. Like, he told me that when Elon was here, he told me that, and I was like, oh, you're just saying that because it's your product. And we were joking around about it. But then when I drove one, I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, it's like, it doesn't even make sense. They're so much better than regular cars because it's instant acceleration. There's no gears. It's one gear. It's instant torque. And it also is so quiet. Like, oh, I can think. I can just drive around this thing and think in total peace and quiet.
The quiet part is really appealing to me, and I'm looking. I'm in a few weeks. I think right now the Model 3s are like 10 weeks out, so I'm probably going to put in an order in 4 or 5 weeks, so I get it right when I need it. But as far as the Elon Musk Tesla stuff, so I bought Tesla stock a long time ago, years ago. I don't remember exactly when. And obviously it did really well for a really long time. And I don't remember when it was, if it was a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, but when Elon smoked pot on your show and the shit hit the fan, I panic sold half my stock.
No!
And the thing is, I always say, I don't know anything about stocks. I invest in mutual funds. You just let it ride. long term, reinvest the dividends, don't think about it. But I have like 5 or 6 stocks that I actually chose to buy. And this is exactly why I don't invest in stocks, because I was convinced that after that incident, horrible things were going to happen. And I was like, I'm selling half. And obviously I regret having done that at this point.
Do you smoke pot, Dave?
I don't smoke anything. I just think inhaling any smoke, I just don't think is good. And so it's nothing. I've not done it.
Well, there's definitely better ways to do it than inhaling smoke, but inhaling smoke is very effective. But, eating sugar is not good either. I'm sure you do that, right?
I try to limit it, certainly.
You're worrying that much about what would happen in the market? I get it if you don't smoke pot. If you smoke pot, you're like, oh, just relax, everybody. Because it seems like a drug. But we were drinking whiskey.
It wasn't the smoking pot
was
that
the reaction to it.
It was what happened with, I think it was around the same time where he said, I might have found someone to take the company private.
Yes.
And the SEC got involved. And I just panicked. And I was like, I'm up so much, I'll just sell half. So it's not the end of the world. I'm hedging my bets here.
He has 2 qualities that I would never bet against. And the first one is an insane work ethic. His work ethic is insane. It's insane. I mean, that guy will work 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. He just keeps going. When he was trying to get the Model 3 production out, he was sleeping on the floor of the factory. I mean, he's a maniac. And he's weirdly intelligent. Like, weirdly. When I'm talking to him, I feel like I'm talking to someone in the future. Like, this is what, if I had to go back in time and have dinner with a Neanderthal, I feel like it'd be real similar to when I sit down and hang out with Elon, how he feels. Because, I think he's like another level of human being. I think that is a natural course of progression for evolution, that we are going to eventually find people that they're getting smarter. They're going to we're not going to stay in a static state forever, right? Just like we didn't stay as an Australopithecus. We became human beings over, natural selection and evolution, all that good stuff. That's going to keep going. And if it's going to keep going, especially when it's integrated with this insane access to technology that kids have today and insane access to information, you're going to have smarter people. It's going to be a different thing. And maybe they're going to, he's a person, he's a human being. So he does make mistakes just like human beings make. Like when he called that guy a pedo guy and that kind of shit. But when it comes to his ability to allocate resources and do things and get things done, he's so smart, they just let him drill tunnels under LA. They're like, okay, go ahead. They're like, how many people would be able to go to the city of Los Angeles and go, I've got an idea. I want to put a tunnel, go all the way to Vegas. They'd be like, this guy's on coke, get him out of here. But with Elon, they let him try. It's I think he's a really important person for our culture. Really important. Like probably one of the most important people.
Where are you on, I guess at some point, coronavirus is a topic. Where are you on what's going on with him reopening the factory and saying arrest me? And I've been following it to some degree.
It's really complicated, right? It's like, who should be able to decide when you can or can't go back to work? It's not straightforward. It's not cut and dry, because if you say the people should be allowed to make their own decision, you run into the very real possibility that, especially if you have to go to work at that factory and you can't not work and you do get sick and you do go home and you do spread it to your family, a loved one could die. That's real. On the other hand, the government doesn't really seem to have any sort of straightforward plan as to how people can economically bounce back from this. There was one of the weirdest quotes. I think it was Trump that said this. We were talking about businesses and restaurants that they'll be open, maybe not with the same owners, but they'll be open again. Did you see that quote?
No, I didn't see that. But it's like, what does that really mean? Does that just mean like a different business will be created?
That's exactly what it means. It means that he's just being pragmatic and maybe cold, whoever made that quote. That is probably how it's going to go down. Is it? Trump says restaurants will make comeback, just maybe with new owners. Yeah, that's what he said. That does not make me feel good, man. If I'm a restaurant owner, and there's a few restaurants that I'm always shouting out on the podcast that are owned by friends of mine, that are, these businesses are hurting so bad They've went like that to no customers, or a very small percentage of customers who order takeout. When they were, they had dine in every night, and they have these bills, and they had their business set up in a way that, you have to make X amount of money in order to stay open. And they were successful, and they were doing well, and one of the toughest businesses to be successful in. And then all of a sudden the rug gets pulled out. So what's the solution? Should people just be able to go to restaurants and everybody who works there as a waiter or a cook, or they just maybe get sick and then more people die? Boy, that doesn't sound good to anybody either. So what is the solution? I don't know, but I don't think that in our particular case, I don't think our governor has the answers. One of the things he's been criticized for is he's decided to open up production for television and films, but not churches. There's another thing they've done that's really nuts that my friend Adam Curry turned me on to. They closed Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, but liquor stores were an essential business. That is just that's not good government. It's not good thinking. There's so many things where they've put into place these lists of what's approved and not approved. And I just don't think that it's first of all, I think the information's constantly changing. And I think that they're going off this old information, and they haven't made adjustments. And then on top of it, I don't think they're qualified to. I don't think they're qualified. Just like we were talking about a president, like one person who's involved in the economy and the environment and all these different things. I don't think one governor can really be smart enough to know, A, what kind of impact it's going to have economically to close all these businesses down, and B, which ones get to open up and what is essential and why. And it's very frustrating for all involved, and it highlights one of the reasons why, the way we do government is it's not perfect. It's definitely better than a lot of ways, a lot of places in the world, but there's a lot of holes in it.
Yeah, I share your frustration with the constantly changing messages. What is essential in one state versus in another state. The issue of churches is a big one. I mean, on the other hand, in Massachusetts, churches were included in the first phase of reopening, and a lot of public health officials say that doesn't make any sense. And the suspicion is that it's there because of a lot of pressure, and that it probably should have been, in phase 2 or maybe even phase 3. But I think it's hard to really talk about the state by state without acknowledging the disastrous response from the federal government. And I don't know where you stand on it. You may totally disagree with me on that. And I think that there's a lot of straw men that are being put in place to argue that Trump handled it beautifully, to use his term. But I think if you start with the idea of the coordinated federal response we could have had, a lot of these other issues that we're having now just wouldn't be issues. And I'm glad to get into it more if you want. I don't know if you've talked about that a lot.
Yeah, I think it'd be really interesting to talk about this, because what do you think they could have done differently? Like, what do you think the government should have done differently, the federal government?
Got it. So here's the narrative has been a lot of two sides that are arguing. People who just vaguely say Trump failed, he didn't do enough, and he was slow, without really giving specifics, which I will give. And then on the other hand, you've got a lot of people who are just reflexively defending, hey, he shut down travel from China really early, and he took it seriously, and we've done the most tests, which is a whole other fiasco talking point that we can get into. But for the most part, I think that the critiques and the praise is just not tied to real dates. So in January, we had our first case, January 20th, I think it was, and South Korea had their first case, January 20th. We then often skip over February. So a lot of people will defend Trump by saying, you're not going to shut down a country when you've got one case. And I totally agree. You're not going to shut down a country over one case. We're not going to shut down a country over 15 cases. There was this point where we had 15 and Trump said, we've got 15 and soon it's going to be 0. I don't think that it was logical at that point to say, shut it all down. But just to pick a date and then we can work around it. March 5, okay? March 5th, China had 80,000 cases. So we already had proof that this was going to be big. Italy had 4,000 cases. So this is March 5. So we already had proof that it'll travel really far and it'll get bad far from China. And we had 221 cases on March 5. It would be very reasonable on March 5th for Trump to say, this is a problem, FDR-like delivery. I know, hard to imagine Trump doing that, but we've got to work together. This is going to be difficult. we're going to do a 30-day. I need all 50 governors to help me on this. Let's do 30 days of stay at home. He probably would have then, on April 5th, have had to ask for another 30. So we would have done like 60 days, March 5 to May 5. And where would we be right now? We'd be in really, really good shape. So it's really easy to just say, dude, you're not going to shut down a country with 5 cases. I agree. But we had the information on March 5th, March 10th, right at any one of these points, if we did a real shutdown, we'd be in such good shape.
First of all, I think that the support for a shutdown that early would have been almost zero. I think you would have a really hard time convincing people that this was going to be that big of a deal and that there wouldn't be something they could do to stop. I think a lot of this is Monday morning quarterbacking, right? We're looking at what happened factually. Like, we're looking at it in the past. This is when there was this amount of cases. When it was happening live, there was a lot of confusion. First of all, the World Health Organization, as recently as January, was saying that, according to China, this is what they wrote on a tweet, it doesn't get transmitted from person to person. So this is in January, right? In March, they were saying you don't need a mask. There's been a lot of confusion. It's not like there was like real, straightforward, clear advice. It's hard for us. It's so easy for us to sit back. Here we are in late May and say, oh, he should have done this. And if he'd done that, everything would have been great. The support for shutting down the whole country for 30 days at the beginning of March was zero. I don't think anybody would have agreed with that.
There's no question. And I do think we want to be careful, though. If we write any retrospective analysis off as Monday morning quarterbacking, then it's not even worth discussing, right? Because we could just say, throw it out. It's Monday morning quarterbacking. I mean,
no, you're right. You're right. Yeah, no, it's definitely look. It clearly wasn't perfect, so there's always going to be room for critique. But like, what the idea that we could have shut everything down, boy, that is such a hard sell. Remember when Cuomo was saying that they're not going to shut down New York? It'd be too hard to shut down New York.
I think Cuomo and de Blasio share. I mean, they're not. They're Democrats and Trump's a Republican. I don't care about that. I mean, certainly there's no doubt that Cuomo and de Blasio are deserving of some blame here as well. I mean, one other example. There was a period. We'd have to look at covidtracking.org to get the exact numbers, but there was a period in either late March or early April where South Korea had their first case the same day we did, within like 6 or 8 hours. It might have been January 1920 or vice versa. But there was a point in late March or early April where South Korea had as many positive tests in a day as we did tests total. So this is really important to understand the discrepancy here.
Yeah.
There was a day where we tested 800 people in the United States. And they did so many tests that they had 800 positive cases. And so the slow testing response is a disaster. And the proof is, we can say it's Monday morning quarterbacking, but South Korea got it right. Taiwan got it right. In terms of places in Europe, Greece did really well. New Zealand did really well. So we may be looking at it retrospectively, but there were examples of countries that were on the ball with testing, and it made a huge difference. Yeah,
it did. There's no doubt about that. And David, maybe you would know the answer to this. Wasn't there was some sort of a pandemic department that was people were moved out of that department, and it sort of was absorbed?
Yes. So there's video of this. It's so funny because Trump was asked about this at a press briefing a couple months ago. This is when Anthony Fauci was still allowed in public. And when the question was asked, why did you shut down the pandemic response team? Trump turned, the video's out there. Trump turned and said, I don't know anything. Tony, do you know anything about that? There's video of Trump from 2018 bragging about shutting that down.
Oh my God.
To get back to our cognitive decline thing, is it possible Trump literally had no memory of that when he was asked about it a couple months ago? Maybe.
Yes, there is. Here's why. I think that. My brain, my memory's going to shit. And I think one of the reasons why my memory's going to shit is I do too many things. I have too many podcasts going. There's too many subjects. I'm researching too many different topics for future guests. And I really feel like you can only have so much data in your head. I really, what that... what Dunbar's number is?
Yeah, it's related to it's some number of items, right? That you can keep track of simultaneously.
Humans that you can have some sort of a by name relationship, recognize their face, people that you know are going to be in your circle of humans you interact with. It's your Dunbar's number, and it's somewhere around 150. And they think it's based on how we evolved in these small tribes, and we've evolved to know the people that are around us, and that's all the database you needed. You didn't need a full terabyte for people's names and addresses. You just needed 150 of them. I think that's the case with everything. And I think when you see a guy like Trump and he's got fucking towers all over the place with his name on it, and how many different businesses is he juggling, and all these different deals going on, and he's cheating at golf and all this different crazy shit. I mean, there's so much data. And then on top of that,
isn't he supposedly not doing it? Like, as far as they've told us, he hasn't been involved in his businesses for 3.5 years. You're saying
but he's still he must have something to do with it. I believe that. Like, this has been something that people say to me, like, hey, I'd love you to get involved in this business. And I would say, I don't have any time. They go, well, you wouldn't need the time. Well, it doesn't matter. I would need the time because I'd have to think about it. If I give you money, now I have to think, like, oh, what's that money? What's happening over there? That's one more thing. It's one more unit of the mental bandwidth that you have. This fucking guy's taxed out. He's taxed out with just the arguments that he's getting with the press. Just think about how much real estate that's taking up in his head, right? And then you think about the disease. You think about restarting the economy. You think about he very well might not remember bragging about disbanding the pandemic team. It's very possible.
Okay, maybe he doesn't. To your question, there was this pandemic response team. He disbanded it in 2018, and he sort of bragged that, hey, we're not going to do stuff where we don't need these people. We just don't, they're not really doing much, so we don't really need them. So he did do that.
Whoops.
To this thing about the press, though, and he's busy with between the press and the virus and reopening and all this different stuff. I don't know if you saw the reports that he often gets into what we would call work, like at noon or later, after watching like 5 or even more hours of TV and tweeting. It doesn't strike me that he's that busy with actual work.
I think he is and he isn't. I think it's still taking up bandwidth in his head. But look, yes. It is so American that he does that. You know what I'm saying? I mean, in not the best way possible, but we're so comical in so many ways. That our president, he's eating junk food and watching TV and angry tweeting at people while he's watching Fox News.
It's so okay. Here's the point I want to make about that.
Okay.
One of the things that scares me about the way that this president is sometimes covered by sometimes it's people who call themselves centrists, or sometimes it's people who say, I'm just reporting facts and not giving an opinion or whatever. One of the things that really scares me is that this is being treated like a normal presidency, when, as you're pointing out, it's really not a normal presidency. And the analogy that I would sort of apply to it would be, like, imagine that you're doing UFC commentary, and this is like me going out on a limb because this is not my area of expertise, but let's see if the analogy will work. Imagine that one of the fighters comes in and he at one point tries to light his opponent on fire. And you as a commentator say, this is an unusual strategy that's very aggressive. You're treating it like it's within the realm of normality, right, when this is a destruction of the system, right? Like, it's not an aggressive strategy. This is crazy, right?
That's a great analogy.
Scares me. It scares me because I see, so I like to use the term enlightened centrist, and it's a little bit pejorative, but it's someone who believes themselves to be above the fray of the bias of the left-right stuff, where they'll say, listen, yeah, Trump kind of has a different way of talking about politics, but I think he's pretty good on trade. It's like, what are you talking about? And that really scares me because there's like a normalization going on that's crazy to me.
Well, there's also a thing that we desire as humans, that's for our leaders to exhibit virtue and dignity. There's like a thing, we expect them to be a statesman or a stateswoman, right? You expect them to, like Tulsi Gabbard's an excellent example of that to me, of someone who speaks like someone that I would appreciate addressing the nation in some sort of a disastrous state. Like if something was going wrong, I would want someone who speaks the way she speaks, talking about it. there's a certain, Cuomo has it. There's a certain characteristic that you would want from someone who is in a position of leadership. Like, I get a certain amount of calm out of listening to him break down the current situations and what they're doing to remedy and mitigate all the problems in New York. And when you think about it, New York got hit harder than anywhere on the planet. Anywhere on the planet, right? In terms of a city?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so at this point, it's anywhere on the planet. I mean, he's done a remarkable job of exhibiting all the characteristics, whether or not you think his decisions were correct or not, because there's some real arguments, especially with the early days of letting old people go back to nursing homes when they had tested, and that's obviously horrible. But the way he communicates like a guy that you would feel comfortable he's going to make good decisions. He seems like a president.
Yeah, and I think that this is why, a lot of mistakes have been made during this, and a lot of it came from, like you're pointing out, we had incomplete information.
Right. Masks
are good, then they don't work. It's transmitted through droplet versus how much is happening via surfaces, and it's dangerous for this group versus it. A lot of mistakes were made because of lack of information. But not everybody was saying stuff like 15 cases will soon be 0. Anybody who wants a test can get a test. It'll wash through by April and we're not going to have cases by that stuff. That has a very particular effect on people who basically want a license to go out and act however they want to act, regardless of what the facts are. And that's why it's been so dangerous to see that stuff.
Well, it also is dangerous because people dismiss some of the things that he said when he was talking about, like, using UV inside the body as a disinfectant, or using Lysol as maybe a cleaning, he was saying. One of the problems that came out of this, I don't know if you're aware of this, there was a publicly traded biotech company that had a concept for UV light that would go in through, when someone was intubated, you would go in through the same tube and they would use that UV light and it would kill the virus from inside. That is something that UV light actually does work to kill bacteria and viruses. In fact, at my house, I have a cell phone cleaner. You put it in there, you close it, and it uses UV light to kill all those things. I mean, this is something that they've had forever. In Steripens. A Steripen is something that backpackers and hikers use. You can take water out of a creek and you take this light bulb. It's like a long wand and you wave it for a certain amount of time in the water and that UV light kills all of the bacteria.
Yeah.
So this company had this product that was going to use that UV light through the tube, and they got pulled off of Twitter. They got their account got banned because it looked like something that was aligning with what Trump said, even though it's legitimate science. And it was that was a real issue.
So let's. There's a bunch there, and I want to get to the Twitter stuff because I saw when you talked to Bridget over the weekend about the regulation of social media, and I want to talk about. I don't know this one, so I can't say too much about it. But so Trump mentioned in that wondering aloud. He said, what if you hit the body with heater light? And what if you put the disinfectants that were up on the TV behind him inside the body? So we got like four things that he mentioned, right? So UV light, heat, and I think isopropyl and bleach were the four elements, so to speak, to use his term, that were up on the screen behind him. After the fact, it was there were these couple papers about this UV technology, and a couple people on Twitter started saying, this is the stuff Trump was referring to. And it's like, no, he wasn't. No. Trump said, I don't know anything about this. I'm asking you, is this something we might look at?
He was winging it.
He was winging it. He was completely winging it. Yeah. So that's number one. After the fact, that's Monday morning quarterbacking, going through PubMed and saying, here's something I found with UV light. I'm sure it was what Trump meant when he said hit the body or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So that's number one. But in terms that this is kind of an example of like, that was a wacky statement. That was an out of control statement that I can't imagine almost any other politician wondering aloud about. But there is nothing that this guy's supporters won't defend. Like he could, it doesn't matter. It doesn't, that's the scary thing.
That is a scary thing. And that was one of the weirdest ones to try to justify.
Yes.
I think the correct response was he was winging it. He obviously didn't know what he was talking about, and he he was like asking questions. He was throwing some questions around. They just weren't good ones, right? And it, like, say if you or I, like, I don't know much about, internal combustion engines. I don't really understand them that much. I kind of know there's spark plugs and there's fuel injection, but I don't really know what the fuck's going on. If I had to explain it to somebody, like how the gas gets converted into energy and how the pistons go up and something fires and what's regular, I would be doing. So I go, it's probably you got to get the gas in there and the fire and then it's exploding and it would be similar to the way he was describing using disinfectants on people. But one of the things that I think he did say was something about getting light in the body. I think he did say something about getting light in the body.
He listed it and said, "Is that something you can look into?"
Yeah, he got stuck. He got stuck rambling, and he just kept going. And it's probably pretty safe to assume he enjoys some kind of stimulant. And I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's legal or illegal. And I think, if he was taking all that ephedrine that he had in his, remember in that famous picture where he was eating the taco bowl?
So someone wrote to me and said that it is true. There's this picture where Trump tweeted he loves Hispanics. I don't know if you remember that tweet.
That was after he had said crazy shit about Mexicans possibly coming over here to rape and murder. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
And there's a picture where if there's an open drawer over his left shoulder, and there's a bunch of Sudafed packs in the, exactly.
Come on, if I was going to get people to I would, hold on, let me open up this drawer real quick. All right, now take the picture. Just to fuck with people. Just to let's put a needle and a baggie and a spoon in there. Just don't say nothing.
Someone wrote to me though and said that version of Sudafed, which is I guess the UK version, doesn't contain the same stimulant that the American version has. I don't know the truth, but I want to make sure we're careful about what we
should
say.
be careful.
I just don't know.
I like talking shit though, so let's keep going.
Okay.
I wonder if the UK version is stronger. Do we even know? Jamie, is that possible for you to look right now? No. Jamie's.
I thought it was the opposite of that.
I thought it was the opposite as well. I thought the UK version was stronger.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's what I had heard, but I've done zero research.
Yeah.
So,
no, listen, I mean, you and I have talked about the tongue thing where it looks like he's essentially, like his tongue is attacking him.
It was like his tongue was Weekend at Bernie's, and he was moving that fucker around in his mouth trying to keep talking.
There's the stuff where he's he seems to struggle with S's where it's like a sh sound.
Yeah.
And there was speculation that it's dentures, but rich guys don't have dentures, they have dental implants.
Unless you're super old school.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. And then there's pictures of him having really dilated pupils, even under TV lighting, which is weird because TV lighting's really, really bright. I don't know.
Really? But are those real pictures? That's the problem. I've seen some pictures.
Well, I don't know. I guess we'd have to look at them one by one. But.
Well, dilated pupils is usually a response to some sort of drug, right? Some people get that with MDMA. They get that with certain amphetamines,
To be fair, I think that the most sort of innocuous explanation would be sometimes it's like the very high-key Trump, very agitated Trump talking fast and sweating.
Yes.
And then sometimes there's this depressed Trump where he's talking really, really slowly and he has a totally different delivery. He looks depressed and sad. It's possible that for either some medication that he's actually prescribed or just his energy cycle during the day. I mean, we all to some degree have it. Maybe there's times a day where he's up and sometimes when he's down. It's not necessarily stimulants, I guess.
Maybe. But he's also a guy who's willing to take hydroxychloroquine in preventative doses.
That?
Yeah,
you think he's taking it?
Yes. I know many doctors who are taking it and have asked me if I want it prescribed to me to take.
Huh.
Yeah, because they're taking it in very small doses. And I said, but my friend had it when my friend Michael Yo was hospitalized with COVID-19, and he was in a terrible place. And he said when they gave him hydroxychloroquine, it had a terrible effect on his body. He said it was devastating. And my doctor said there's a giant difference between the dosage and the response to the dosage of a dose that you would get if you are sick with a disease versus a preventative dose. And he said there's many, many doctors that are taking preventative doses of this hydroxychloroquine, and that this stuff has been around for a long time as a malaria medication.
Of course.
And Dr. Drew did a whole video segment that I watched recently about that as well, saying basically the same thing. I think that anyone, though, who's willing to just start taking hydroxychloroquine, I mean, maybe take stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like, as long as your doctor prescribes you stuff. Do you remember that article? I think you and I had discussed this. There was a journalist that claimed they found the right pharmacy that prescribed Trump speed, where Trump would pick up this stuff that he would get, this amphetamine, for a metabolic condition. Do you remember that?
I don't remember that one.
Okay. But if your doctor prescribes you something, like I have friends that take Adderall, and they take Adderall, the doctor prescribes them Adderall, and they take it, and they don't think there's anything wrong with it because the doctor prescribes it. They don't even think that they do drugs. I'm like, you're on a hardcore stimulant all the time, and it's really, really, really common. So if he's a guy that's willing to take hydroxychloroquine, which, I mean, maybe it's a good thing to take. I mean, he's around a lot of people, and it is possible that it has some sort of a preventative effect. Obviously, I don't know. But if you're the guy who takes things, you probably take things to go to bed. You take things to wake up. I need a little pick-me-up. I need there's a lot of people out there that take stuff.
There's a type of person who's just into trying stuff and seeing what it does for them.
Yeah, that's me. I'm into stuff. but I don't take medication though, like that. Like that seems to me like, woo, like what about the immune system? Like, how much do you trust your immune system? Is there things you could do to boost your immune system? So I like to talk to legitimate, clinical researchers and nutritionists that understand the body's effect and what nutrients you're putting in, and heat shock proteins from sauna and things like all kinds of different stuff that you can do. Making sure you get enough sleep and that's a giant factor. All these factors that we're not getting discussed in the news when we're hearing all these things about social distancing and covering your face. And it would be really nice if the exact same amount of effort was put to let's all use this time to make healthy choices and to understand that there's a real benefit to having a healthy body and a healthy immune system. And this is the best example of it we could ever possibly face, is a pandemic that with some people, they brush it off like it's nothing. And I know many people that have had it like that. And then I know other people that got it, and they got it really bad. I've had two friends that were hospitalized, one who was on a respirator. He was there for over a month. He's an older guy, but the situation for them was terrible. But there's a bunch of factors: nutrition, body being run down, being exhausted, too much travel, alcohol. There's all these different things. Like, we need more education about that. Like, there are preventative measures that we can take. It's not just as simple as put a Band-Aid on it, cover your face, use hand sanitizer. That's good advice too. But better advice is both of those things together.
Yeah. So on hydroxychloroquine, my understanding of the randomized controlled trials right now is that it's essentially been tested as a treatment when someone is already sick.
Yes. And
it doesn't seem particularly effective, and there can be serious side effects. There is a study going on, I think, in the UK, looking at the low dose prophylactically. Yep. I get emails from people who are like, you're against hydroxychloroquine because Trump's for it. I've been talking about hydroxychloroquine longer than Trump. I talked about it 10 days before Trump ever mentioned it, along with 7 other things that we're looking at. I don't care. I want, what works. That's my only priority.
Yes.
The reasons I doubted whether Trump was really taking it were that he seemed confused about how long he had been on it and what kind of dose he was getting. Like, at one point, it wasn't clear whether he was getting the weekly dose, which is how it's taken for malaria, or a small daily dose. He seemed confused. And then the letter that his doctor put out didn't actually say he was taking it. It was one of the weirdest letters. I don't know if you saw it, where there's one paragraph which just says, we talked about this drug and determined the potential benefits outweigh the risks, or something like that.
Maybe the doctor did that because it's off-label, because it is an off-label drug. So if he is prescribing it to Trump, it's not FDA approved.
Who's going to get in trouble? It's the president. I mean, you think that's why they would write the letter was weird, is the point. It said everything other than Trump is taking it, which is, if it's the letter to prove Trump's taking it, you would think it would mention that.
Well, maybe the doctor hesitated and said it's controversial. Maybe Trump asked for it. We're going way out on the speculation limb here. These are thin branches. Maybe he said, I want to take it, and the doctor's like, wow, that's, I mean, there's some downsides. He's like, look, I'm going to get it either way. And so he gets it from another doctor. It could be that. I know a guy. Don't worry about it. I'll call a guy. I'll have it tomorrow.
Ask for the letter. The point is, after he mentioned it and people said, is he really taking it? Clearly the White House directed the doctor, put out a letter proving I'm taking it. And the doctor writes a letter, doesn't say Trump's on it.
Well, maybe the doctor was like, hey man, why the fuck did you say that? I mean, I don't know. It's there's a lot of speculation. I don't think you would outright lie about that because the reason being is that I do know people are taking it. And I do know doctors, and I've discussed it with doctors, and I've even been offered it. And I think people are willing to, if they really think there's a possibility of getting ahead of this thing and some sort of a preventative measure, they'll take it, and especially if you're a type of person who takes things.
So do you think that there's going to be a period where wealthier folks with connections will be able to buy a vaccine before it's available?
I think that's a possibility for sure, right? Don't you think? If there's a small quantity, that's always going to be the case. I mean, one thing that people were getting upset at me in the early days of the pandemic was that I was testing everybody that came into the podcast studio. And they're like, where are you getting these tests? Well, I'm just buying them. I'm paying for them. There's a concierge service in Los Angeles. They come to you, and the doctor will administer these tests. You just have to pay for it. And I understand if people don't have that money, that sucks. But I'm not going to not do it if I can. So this is a similar situation. Like, I can understand why people would be upset, but if you had money and someone came up to you and said, David, we have this perfect vaccine. It's absolutely been proven. However, only 1% of the population is going to be able to get it. But if you get it and you and your family can have it and we'll make sure you're safe, would you not take it because you wanted other people to have access to it? I think a lot of people who have access to it would probably say, listen, I have to do the right thing for my family. I'm going to try to help people get it. I'm going to try to spread the word and hopefully they'll be okay, but I have to take care of myself right now.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
It's unfortunate that anybody would ever have to choose that.
Yeah, and how it'll go down, I guess, is a question mark. Like, how will people in the know be made aware that this is now something they'd potentially be able to buy?
Are you aware of? I mean, look, there's a bunch of different trials going on right now where they're trying to figure out how to make a vaccine, but there's so far no coronavirus vaccine has ever been successful, right? There's not one that they can use as a model. Is that correct?
There is. So there are coronavirus. There's coronavirus vaccines that have worked in poultry, from my understanding, which can be modified potentially. So I think at least one or two of the vaccine candidates are modified poultry coronavirus vaccines that could potentially be used in humans. And the other unique thing about this vaccine, potentially, as I understand it, is that this would be, if I understand correctly, it would be the first vaccine of its type that instead of having like a weakened version of the virus, instead it would be a compound that triggers the body to create certain proteins, if I'm understanding that correctly. That it would be innovative in that sense as well.
Yeah, that was explained to me by Alex Jones. I had a long conversation with him about it last night where it's an mRNA vaccine, vaccine. But there's never been one of those that's successfully been used on humans, right? This is a new thing?
Well, I don't know that there's been
now all of a sudden we're both biologists.
From what I've read, there's not been an opportunity like this where the technology would be near enough where we would try to make that type of vaccine versus the traditional kind, is my understanding.
Dude, that one sounds scary. I'm going to wait. I don't want to be an early adopter of that one, especially if there's especially if this is something that for a giant percentage of the population, in terms of the virus itself, it's not deadly. Wouldn't you want to know if there's a new thing that's never been tried on people before? Wouldn't you want to know like what the long-term ramifications of taking that are? Just on anything, any kind of medication, anything.
I think what is important to remember is even if phase 3 of the trial is shortened, that would only lead to maybe a question mark as to how long the immunity lasts. But before you even start testing it to see whether it generates immunity, it's safety tested. And by the time it's available, even to like buy it as a wealthy person, I think that the safety piece of it will be widely established, and it might just be a question of like, does it give you 6 months or 12 months of immunity? That doesn't really scare me. It seems like 6 months is still better than 0.
Yeah, if it works. Yeah, and if it is really safe. For sure, look, if it works and it's safe, we'd all want to take it. Really simple, right? The real question is if this is a totally new thing, and obviously I'm grossly unqualified to be talking about this, but if it is a new kind of vaccine, like what are the possibilities of this going wrong? And what could that mean to people that do have an adverse reaction to it?
So I want to be really careful not to say things I'm not sure of, but also not to allow false fears about the vaccine to be perpetuated. That this would be the first widely used mRNA vaccine for a human virus does not mean that it would be the beginning of the research into using these types of vaccines in humans. And my understanding is that it's been decades that this has been researched and that it's been under development, generally speaking, and now it's being used specifically for coronavirus. So I want to make sure that I'm not like in any way implying that I have any broader concerns about the type of vaccine, because I don't. And I'm not saying that somebody might not present one of those concerns, but I'm not aware of any of those concerns.
But that's a well-worded way of describing it. Yeah, I mean, obviously, we're all hoping that it works. We're all hoping that everyone's going to benefit from this and that we'll have a cure so we can go back to as normal as possible. But, you know, again, like I said, I think we really, more than anything, we're underappreciating the value of the immune system. And I think that's something that is really driving me crazy about the short-sightedness of this response, is that it's all about sanitation and avoidance and all these different factors. And very little of it is about strengthening the immune system and keeping the body healthy and making a shift of recognizing that, you know, hey, we're all very vulnerable here. We're all very vulnerable, and we've had a wonderful Goldilocks sort of time between World War II and now, where things haven't really been nearly as bad as they've been all throughout human history. And we kind of have to recalibrate what's possible in terms of things could go wrong. And when things go wrong and we're grossly unprepared, we find ourselves in the situation that we're in right now.
Yeah, I've seen some really scary numbers about for the younger serious cases, like under 50, maybe even under 60. Obesity is extremely prevalent. That's really
huge.
Scary. There's some correlation studies about vitamin D, but there's really a lot of question marks about whether it's a causal thing and whether the infection itself can reduce your vitamin D. Like, it would be delightful to learn that if you have low vitamin D, you supplement it and it protects you.
Yeah.
But there's a correlation, and it's really not clear what the deal is with that, because vitamin D is so cheap. I mean, it's free from the sun, and it's one of the cheapest supplements around.
But do you know that 70% of the United States is deficient in vitamin C? So it's a giant...
C or D?
D. Did I say C?
D. Oh, you said C, yeah.
I meant D. It's some enormous number of people do not have sufficient vitamin D, and as many as... I think it's, I had Dr. Rhonda Patrick on the podcast a couple of days ago to discuss this. It's more than 20% have insufficient vitamin D to the point where it's dangerous, where they can, you know, it's vitamin D apparently is a hormone as well as a vitamin. And the best way to get it is out in the sun, but you can supplement it. And in supplementing it, it changes so many things about your body, about your body's ability to recover. It's for muscle development. It's for there's a lot of different factors that vitamin D benefits you in, and most of us don't have enough of it. It's kind of a crazy thing. Zinc has also been connected to recovery from COVID. And then one of the things they were speculating about with hydroxychloroquine and zinc, that they would use the two of them together. And there's been some speculation that maybe it wasn't, in fact, the hydroxychloroquine that was really benefiting these people. It was possibly the zinc. And that zinc in combination with hydroxychloroquine was what was helping people.
Yeah, I mean, we're just spitballing here.
Right.
But on the zinc thing, what I saw was it seems to only be useful for recovery from viruses and colds if you are deficient. But that if you have a normal level of zinc, that it doesn't really seem to do that
makes sense.
That much.
So it's probably just like vitamin D. The best move is to keep your body at a good state. And so few of us ever do get your vitamin levels checked. It's really an important thing. And supplementing, I feel very, very strongly about this. It's been dismissed by some people as being not necessary if you have a balanced diet. The reality is most people don't have a balanced diet. And particularly when it comes to getting a wide range of nutrients that we know are beneficial. I mean, you really should kind of vary what you eat to try to get as much of that stuff in as you can from natural sources. But man, especially in times like this, it's just very important to keep your B12 high, C, D, zinc, all those things. Keep your body in a great state. Drink a lot of water, and we're not hearing, again, I mean, I'm beating a dead horse, but we're just not hearing enough about this.
Yeah, I got a vitamin D and B12 at-home test a month ago because I was just curious, what are my levels? I live in Boston. You don't go outside that much in the winter, and it's only starting to be spring now. And they were both fine, but had my D been low, I would have supplemented. It's so cheap, and why not,
Yeah, we're very fortunate. I mean, it's really easy to get some vitamin D, and it can, make a giant difference in your body. Are you changing anything about your lifestyle, or obviously you're stuck at home, but are you changing anything in terms of like going, okay, I need to make some corrections to make myself healthy, or corrections to get better sleep, or?
Not really, because I felt pretty good about what I was doing before. Obviously my gym's closed, so I'm running outside and riding my bike and working out at home.
Do you feel weird when you run past people and you're real close to them? Because you're like,
okay, so I'm wearing a mask anytime I go anywhere inside. Like I go to the grocery store, I'm wearing a mask. If I have to go to the post office, although I'm trying to avoid it, I wear a mask. From what I've read, 90% of the contagion is in 4 places: home, offices, public transit, and large gatherings. The other 10% is happening mostly indoors in other situations. The outdoor contagion, from what I'm reading, is like almost zero unless you're doing something really stupid. So I don't feel like if I go running, I need to wear a mask, but I do it to avoid dirty looks, to be totally honest with you. Like that,
it's terrible breathing through that thing, isn't
terrible.
it? While you're running?
It's terrible.
Ugh, your bad breath coming back at you.
I went out on my bike and I thought, I'm outdoors. Like this, nobody's really getting this outdoors if you're not in a group of people. And I didn't wear my mask. And 3 bikers coming the opposite way were swearing at me. So I was like, all right, just to avoid that situation, I guess I'll wear the mask even when I'm just walking around.
I think there's just a lot of unhappy people that are looking to yell at people, and this is their new way to do it. They see you with no mask on running. I don't know why, though, it wouldn't be spread through the air outside. That logic doesn't make sense. If it's spread through the air inside, why, if you're passing someone and you're breathing out heavy because you're running, it would make it seem to me that would be a better way. You walk right into it if it's in the air. I mean, it's particulate matter. It's in the air and you're breathing it out.
Well, this is why I'm wearing the mask. But from the studies I've seen, there were these really scary looking images where it was like black, where the particles were different colors.
I saw that,
and it was like, you could be 20 feet in front of someone on a bike and you could sneeze and the wind could bring the droplets directly back and they could breathe in at that exact moment. Yeah. I don't deny at all that it's physically possible, but every single study that's coming out where it's possible to sort of figure out like, where are people getting this? I'm just not aware of it being a real risk on a 6-foot wide bike path to run past 2 people. Like, it's got to be 1 in 10 million, right?
No, I don't think so.
Really?
Nah. Why? If you're breathing it out, if you're running right, if you're breathing out, you got spit. There's stuff that comes out of your mouth, and then someone's going this way. It just makes sense.
Okay. Yeah. All right. I mean, listen, I'm wearing the mask. I just am unsure how much of the contagion's happening out there.
Yeah. Oh, right now, Jamie just pulled this up. Joe Biden asked Amy Klobuchar to undergo vetting to be running mate. Wow. Breaking news, David Pakman. How you feel?
Is that the only person who's being vetted?
I don't know, but she's one of them. Democrat of Minnesota has been asked by Joe Biden to undergo a formal vetting to be considered vice presidential running mate. One of several potential candidates now being scrutinized by his aides.
Right.
Okay, so she's just been announced as being one of them.
Senator Jeanne Shaheen. Oh, that said something about Jeanne Shaheen there as well, did it?
Where's that? Yeah. Jeanne Shaheen, Democrat of New Hampshire, who's running for re-election this year, declined Biden's invitation. She said, no, son. Senator Maggie Hassan, other New Hampshire senator, has agreed to be vetted. So he's it's interesting that he's definitely, like, he wants to have a woman.
Yep.
Like, that's, do you think that's a political ploy? Or do you think that it makes sense? Like, why do you think he would do that?
I think that the timing of when he made that call was calculated to be advantageous. I don't remember exactly what was going on right when he said it. But I think that it was a calculated move at the time. I think, look, honestly, unless you pick someone who's going to actively damage your campaign, I don't think it matters that much. You need someone who's essentially going to stay out of the way, not cause any kind of new scandal. Like Tim Kaine with Hillary Clinton. I don't think he did anything for her one way or the other. Like he was just kind of out of the way.
I forgot him. Until you just brought his name up, I forgot.
Right. And I think that really what you just want to avoid someone who's going to cause a problem. Like Palin for McCain was
that was a little bit of a problem.
It was a problem, exactly. So you just want it's like you just want to avoid a problem, I think. And I think Elizabeth Warren is probably up there. Kamala Harris is probably up there. Amy Klobuchar now we know for sure.
It's just funny when you say I'm going to have a specific kind of person. Like one of the big speculations was I'm going to have a woman of color. Like that he needs to have a woman of color, like, very specific. I wish he had it would be hilarious if someone said I want a Chinese lady. Period. Mainland Chinese lady. That's going to be my running mate. I'm gonna like heal this nation and China together. Just only Chinese ladies. I don't care how good you are. If you're some white guy, you can fuck off. Like it's kind of hilarious, that we
yeah.
I would want the best person that he could possibly get, especially when you consider his physical state and mental state's been questioned. He doesn't look that great. I would want someone who I really feel like could make the cut.
Yeah, I'm not big on this type of identity politics. Where, I mean, listen, last time I was on, we talked about that time where we won't even say her name, but where this woman tried to get me fired from my teaching gig because I said saying you will not consider a white or male candidate that's not okay. But I do think that when you think about all of the people that have been president, so it's like almost all white men, and then Obama, who was half black, there would be something pretty powerful for a lot of young women and women of all ages to see that, oh, okay, there's a woman in this position, vice president or president. Like, I don't want to minimize that. But you and I have talked before. For me, categorizing people in these ways is not like my first instinct.
Yes, but it's also, we're recognizing that there is racism and sexism in the world. Like it's not a fake thing, it's a real thing. We would love it if there was none. If there was none, there would be no consideration whatsoever towards image because no one would care. No one would care. How good would it look to have a woman in there? No one would care if there was zero sexism and there was and no one would care if it's a woman of color if there was zero racism. But there is some. So we go, well, it would be a great thing. I get it. It would. If there was a woman president, like, it's one of the reasons why I thought Tulsi Gabbard would be amazing. If she ran for president, became president, and you're talking about a woman who's a veteran, who's served overseas twice, who's been a congresswoman for 6 years, I mean, that would be great for everybody. Like a really qualified woman who's the president. That would be great for everybody. Just happens to be a woman.
If your kids, maybe they have asked you, but if they said, how come there's never been a woman president? Like, how would you answer that question?
That's a good question. It would depend on which kid. And I would probably say that our society up until the beginning of the 20th century, women weren't even allowed to vote. And so there's a lot of catching up to do. And then women weren't really even in the business place in terms of working alongside men in offices and in industry. When did that start?
Well, there was a big push towards that in the period during and after World War II.
So the 50s-ish.
In trying to stimulate a lot of new industry and get more people working and producing stuff.
Yeah. So what I would say is that men, in terms of public positions of leadership, have had this massive head start, and that we're changing the way we look at what a leader is, and that we used to look at a leader as being like the alpha chimp that leads us to battle. I mean, you go back in time 10,000 years ago, that's essentially what a leader was. And now we look at a leader as someone who can navigate the treacherous waters of the environment and industry and unions and all the different things that the president has to deal with. And it doesn't require someone who's male or female. It requires someone who, again, I hate to keep bringing up Tulsi Gabbard, but I think she's great. She seems like a leader, right? And that's what you're looking for. You're looking for someone who's going to make good decisions, someone with good ethics and good morals that's going to sort of guide you in a way that the country will be better off with them doing that job than it would be without them. So that, but again, if I was talking to my kids about it, it's a complicated discussion, and it would be a long discussion, and I think you would really have to go back to how different human beings are now than they were even in. I've talked to my kids about my grandparents. My grandparents came over from Italy during the early days of the 20th century, and they had a hard life. And when my grandfather used to talk to me about living on a farm and coming over here from Italy and, how hard it was to struggle and what their life was like, it's almost unimaginable to my kids today when I describe it to them, and when I try to describe what life is like today versus life was like for them in 1920, 100 years ago, you're talking about a totally different world. And I think that that's what we're dealing with too when it comes to the reason why there has been no woman president. It's not just that there's never been a woman president because society is weird, but it's moving in a better direction. It's just been humans are changing. We're changing what we find acceptable. We're changing what we find to make sense and what doesn't make sense, and we're readjusting things all the time. But I think one of the things that you said that is an important point was that if a woman becomes president, it does send a message that this is possible and it gives people hope. And I think in a lot of ways, Barack Obama did that. And when Barack Obama was in office, we're like, hey, if people are racist, even if there are racists, there's such a small amount that you can get this guy to win the popular vote and become the president of the United States while he's black. This is amazing. This is amazing for everybody. That it shows that a guy who's the son of a single mom can make it as far as the highest office on the planet Earth, the elected office, the commander-in-chief of the greatest army the world has ever known. So there's great value in image. And this is where I think a lot of people are correct in their anger about Trump. Even people who are Trump supporters. The value of the way a person conducts themselves in that highest of high offices, it's important for the morale of all of us. And when someone says ridiculous shit or attacks, some reporter and the way he kind of goes about it, it's so petty. It's so unbecoming of what we would hope for in terms of like someone who gets to that spot. We want that person to be better than us. We don't want you to do things that we would also do. We want you to be better.
Well, that's what really scares me about when I see the people who for 20 years or for however long they've been following politics talk about Republicans I'm talking about now, what matters is that you've got to be religious and you've got to pray and, be God-fearing, and you've got to, divorce is bad and you've got to speak a certain way and all of these different things. It was all kind of a ruse, right? Like they never really cared about that stuff. It was just that those were the people that were being presented to them for a very long time. And then now it's Trump and he's the opposite of all of it. And they never really cared about that stuff.
Well, he represents them in some ways. You just have to make concessions to be on their side. And that's one of the real problems with having two parties, right? It's like if you're not in the other party, you must be in my party. If you're not with those people, you must be with. If you're saying Hillary Clinton is, she's a problem, and you got to drain the swamp and these career politicians, oh well, then you must be over here. If you're against corruption, oh well, then you must be on my side because I'm against corruption too. And if we had 10 different parties to choose from, it would be way better. We would have a way better understanding of the subtleties of human characteristics and what we enjoy and what we don't enjoy, what we believe and what we don't believe. I think a big part of what you're saying when you join a team, whether it's the Republicans or the Democrats, you're sort of adopting a predetermined group of opinions. Like you know how to fall in line. Like you can almost, to a person, you ask someone if are you conservative? Yes. You can almost guess how they're going to feel about the environment, or how they're going to feel about climate change. Particularly freedom of choice. That's a big one, right? Like pro-choice. If you ask someone if they're a Republican, boy, what percentage are going to say that they're pro-life? It's going to be a high percentage. what percentage are going to be in support of the Second Amendment? It's going to be a very high percentage. Now, if you ask someone who's on the left, what do you think about gun control? It's going to be a high percentage that are in favor of gun control, in favor of maybe doing something different about the Second Amendment, but a high percentage that would, that would be pro-choice. And these lines in the sand, you got to wonder how much of these are just adopted. Like how much of these are people who have really analyzed all these issues and come to this objective conclusion based on information and based on their own discussions with other intelligent people, and how many people just adopt these positions. And I think
you're signing on to the package, to
yes.
the orthodoxy in a certain way. And one of the crazy things is I get emails from viewers, particularly in Northern Europe, who say, one of the craziest things about American politics when you're in Europe is, compared to the diversity of parties that they have in many of those countries, the standard Democrat and the standard Republican are really, really close. Like, what are they even really arguing about? It's a lot of social issues. On economic stuff, it's is 39.7% top tax rate or 36% top tax rate? I mean, of course, there are Democrats who want a much higher top tax. There are Republicans who want to do away or really drop it. But in a lot of cases, a lot of this stuff is created as, I don't want to say as theater, but it's to create a package people can sign on to.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's one thing that Trump has done well, ingratiating himself with religious folks, because it's never really been his thing. And now all of a sudden, he kind of goes through the motions, does all the God stuff. He says all the things. When,
So you don't believe it for a second, right?
What, Santa Claus? What do you mean? What do you ask me?
No.
I believe? If I believe he's become religion?
Yeah.
Religious, rather. One of my favorite interviews was this one guy who was a preacher. He's one of those televangelists, and he was talking about Trump, and someone trying to bring up Trump's past. He goes, "That was before he was born again." And
right.
Can I get an amen? And everybody was cheering, yes, that was before he was born.
Yeah.
And their concept is completely absolve someone. That would be nice if you could just... How many times can you be born again? Can you fuck up a gang of times and just be reborn every time with a fresh slate? That'd be very beneficial.
Question. Yeah, I don't know what the answer is to that.
As a concept, that's a great idea. Like, I would love if I, I feel real haunted by my mistakes. Son, just raise your hand and we're going to take those mistakes away. You have done them, but you're free. Do you know who General Butt Naked is? You know who General Butt Naked is?
No.
This is the best example of that you're ever going to hear. General Butt Naked was he was in the Civil War in Liberia, and he was known for getting buck naked, taking off all his clothes, and going to war. So he would go to war, and he's killed many, many, many people. And on video on Vice, back when they had the Vice Guide to Travel, on video, he was talking about what they would do if they captured children from the opposing army, that they would cut their heart out and eat pieces of their heart. He was talking about this, murdering children and eating their heart. Then he found Jesus, and they absolved him of everything. And now he's a preacher. So General Butt Naked is now a preacher, and he runs around, and he's killed who knows how many thousands of people and eaten kids' hearts. And they're like, but that was before. Now he's a man of Jesus. Pretty amazing. It's a great clause if you want someone to join up.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Oh, there you go.
Have you seen the preachers and the televangelists selling the coronavirus stuff? Either like you send them money and they'll pray it away, or like the silver stuff and all of these different things?
Yeah, we were watching that one guy who was blowing. What's his name again? Kenneth Copeland? That same guy. He's the same guy that lady came up to him and asked him about flying public, and he was like, saying that there's demons on those planes. Are you calling poor people demons? I never said that. And he got crazy with her. That video alone of him and his wild eyes pointing at her is so goddamn terrifying. Whoo. Yeah, it's dark. All that stuff is dark.
But again, it's what you talked about, where it's lack of information combined with a desire for some general better health.
Yeah.
But instead of going out and exercising and getting some sunlight, it's maybe, a silver toothpaste is going to prevent the virus or something like that. It's crazy.
It is crazy. Well, there's also obviously these are the same people. Jim Baker was one of them, right? Who was selling survival slop. He was selling these buckets of survival food that you could actually use as the base of your table. Like you don't know where to put this stuff. And he had tables where he had like the tabletop was sitting on these survival buckets, and he's selling this shit, and he's even eating it on the show. Like, very good. Like, it is one of the televangelists are one of the very weirdest elements of society, where we're allowing people to just lie, like clearly lie, but we feel like the lie is so obvious that you have to be so dumb to believe them. I can't help you. And this is, I made this analogy recently because I was talking about YouTube censorship and how YouTube has decided that they're going to pull down videos from doctors who have different opinions on how to handle the coronavirus and criticisms of how things are. And I'm like, it's really interesting that they make that line, that's the line that doctors, practicing physicians, they'll pull their video down. But people talk about the flat earth, they'll leave that up. Because it's like it's so dumb. It's like, you can leave that up. That one's so dumb. You have to be a moron to think the earth's hollow and that there's aliens living inside it, traveling around on laser beams. There's videos that say that. And they'll leave those up. And they'll leave televangelists up. But then it gets to these doctors that are saying, we're looking at the statistics, this is the deaths in terms of age groups, and this is why it's not nearly as dangerous as we thought it was, and these quarantines are not the best way to handle it. We think there's better way. They'll take that video down, even if it's someone who's saying rational things. And I don't think that's smart. I don't think that's a healthy way to handle things. I don't think it's good for the debate. I think, in fact, it strengthens the resolve of the people on the other side that watch those videos, and some of those points resonate with those people. I think that's not the way to handle it. I don't think removing those videos is the way to handle it. I think the way to handle it is let other people with opposing points of view put their videos up and let people discuss and debate and see which one makes more sense to you. And usually the weight of the information overwhelms the bullshit. And at least with most people, I don't understand why it's okay to leave some obviously full of shit videos up, but take down things that are very, very controversial but debatable.
Okay, so this now gets into that part of your episode with Bridget from over the weekend that I saw, where you basically accurately characterized the view that I had last time I was on with you about the regulation of social media.
Yeah.
So first, just to play devil's advocate just for a second on why do you leave up flat Earth but take down the coronavirus videos that YouTube or whoever disagrees with. One can make an argument that there is no real action someone would take because they believe the Earth is flat that would endanger others. I mean, I guess you might try to go to the edge and see if you fall off or something, right? Like, but there's no actionable thing for the most part that flat Earth belief
That's
could
a good
cause.
point. That's a good point.
Whereas if this disinformation about, so like I'll give you one, there was a video I saw about coronavirus where there was a doctor saying, these quarantines are dangerous because if you're not exposed to bacteria, your immune system will be out of practice essentially, and it's going to shut down. It's not going to work as well. And then another doctor, a YouTube guy who has a YouTube channel, did a counterpoint where he said, he's talking about the hygienic theory, but he has it backwards. It is true that if you are never exposed to dirt and bacteria and whatever, it will impact your immune system. But it's actually the opposite is what happens. It's that because you're not regularly exposed to things, your immune system will overreact and it'll start attacking things that aren't really a threat. Okay, so what's the harm, I guess, right? Like there was a video where these doctors identified what they think is the problem with the quarantine, and then another doctor came in. Can I pause you for a
second there?
Yeah.
I think it's both things, though. I think it's actually been proven that, that does happen, where your immune system overreacts to people that don't get exposed to enough. But I think it's also been proven that people that are around a lot of different people and constantly exposed to people have stronger immune systems because of that it does get practice and it does get strengthened by exposure.
Oh, yeah. I think that's what the sort of fact check was saying, which is it's completely true that exposing kids, to the world out there is good, but that what is being asserted will happen from staying home for 2 months is both wrong, and it wouldn't happen in
that
2 months anyway.
That it weakens it, like the idea that it weakens the immune system. I was wondering about that, whether or not it was like a cardiovascular system, like that it only responds to the level of work that it needs to do. Like your cardiovascular system, if you take some time off, boy, it slacks off really quickly. It would be a real shame if that was the case with the immune system. I don't think it is, but I mean,
I guess the point I was trying to make was, there are a lot of people who are understandably frustrated by what's going on, and they're looking for any excuse to just let it rip, so to speak, and go and do whatever. And so I think that, to play devil's advocate, there is a different level of risk from allowing some of this disinformation to be propagated that doesn't exist with leaving flat Earth up.
That's a very good point. Very good point.
But that being said, last time we talked, we had this conversation about okay, if a platform gets to a certain size, does it not kind of enter some new space where you need someone to establish some guidelines?
Can
or something
I pause
like that?
you real quick? One of the problems with this argument, though, is that particularly those doctors in Bakersfield, they weren't spreading disinformation. They were basically spreading the actual facts of fatalities and age groups, and they just had a different perspective.
Different interpretation.
Well, not even the different interpretation, because they're basically just going over the statistics, but they had a different viewpoint of how they should move forward. And they were also discussing things like furloughed doctors and nurses because hospitals are no longer doing elective surgeries, and then many hospitals are on the verge of bankruptcy, which apparently is true.
Yeah.
The problem is that's not disinformation. And so if you're saying that if giving people disinformation makes them make poor choices, then they could be putting themselves at risk or putting loved ones at risk because of that, yes. Okay, I'm with you. Yeah, I agree.
Yep.
But this isn't disinformation. This is actual information. It's just information with a different perspective other than what we're getting, which is only one point of view from the World Health Organization and people who subscribe to those ideas. So it's not a lie. But I think your point of if someone believes in the flat earth, there's no harm in that. That's true. So if someone believes in Pizzagate and they think that there's kids being held in a basement somewhere and they go and shoot up the store, then it is a problem, right? And though that kind of a video, I could understand where someone would say, hey, that shouldn't be up there because this is bullshit and this is what gets caused from that. I don't think it's the same argument when we're all trying to figure out what's going on with a medical situation, and two practicing physicians, two actual medical doctors are talking about their perspective on this virus. So I don't think they're really on the same line.
Yeah, I totally agree that these are not all equivalent situations.
Yeah.
For the purposes of our conversation about what regulation should be in place,
right?
Who gets to regulate, or this sort of thing. The point that I had made last time we talked about this was not necessarily that I'm in favor or against having some kind of infrastructure that says here's how a social network has to operate, YouTube, Twitter, whatever. We could talk about that, and I'm glad to. My argument last time we talked was, I don't know what the legal case is. How do you define legally what it is that is supposed to happen? Is it what would be the legal framework for that? And there's also a double standard element of it, because there's a lot of really, really loud right-wingers who are saying the left is being propped up on social media and the right is being suppressed, to put it very simply.
Right.
And they're calling for regulation. They're against new regulation on gun safety. They're against business regulation. They're against stay-at-home order, et cetera. Now they want to regulate tweets. That's where now they want regulation. That seems extremely cynical and hypocritical to me. But we don't even necessarily have to dig into that to think about okay, if we regulate it, how do we regulate it? Who gets to decide is where
David,
you start.
I think we're dealing with a thing that's very similar to what we talked about earlier. The founding fathers who set up this country in the 1700s had no idea what 2020 was going to be like. And I think when you're talking about freedom of speech, it's like, do you still have freedom of speech if you could just talk and you can't tweet? Well, I guess you do, right? Do you still have freedom to get the word out? Well, you do, but you don't have freedom like you or I do, where you could tweet or you could make a YouTube video. And who gets to have that? And is that an essential service? Is that a thing like the post office or a thing like the electricity and the utilities? Is it an essential thing? I think one could make the argument that in 2020, it's used by so many people to convey so much information, and it's so significant that I believe it is an essential thing. And I think that just banning someone because you don't like what they say or you don't like how they say it, I don't think that's a solution, nor do I think there's a clear solution. Because I think that if you have someone who is hateful and is doxing people and insulting people and stalking people online and saying horrible things, that's not good either, right? There's laws about that in person. You can't harass people in person. Why can you harass people online? Why can you put up your address and have a bunch of people send terrible things to your house? Well, why is that okay? Well, it shouldn't be okay either. We need to figure out what's okay and what's not okay. And I think one of the problems with isolating, like if I think tech people and people that, whether it's Google or Apple, and you've made a really good argument that they may appear left socially, but they absolutely operate right when it comes to finance, when it comes to their business. I think that is true. But I think that when you're dealing with the ability to discuss things, and you might say that your perspective is the one that you want to hear because you're a left-wing person and these are your beliefs, but you're isolating the whole other team from being a part of that conversation. And maybe they have something you want to hear, and maybe they don't have anything you want to hear. But to not allow them to communicate, you are alienating a giant chunk of the population. And if someone gets to a prominent level where they're communicating a certain way, and you just decide that that certain way is unacceptable and you kick them off, you don't just kick them off, you also silence all the other people that are along or aligned with them because they have similar ideas and they don't want to speak out either. When you ban James Woods, you don't just ban James Woods. You ban a lot of other people from saying something. They might be furious about, the Russia investigation or whatever. They want to express themselves, and they panic. They get scared. They worry that they're going to get. That's censorship. That's a form of censorship. And I think these companies, I don't blame them because I don't think they had any idea what they were going to become. And I think they're all adjusting along the way. I think when Twitter first came out, do you remember that? Like you would write at David Pakman is going to the movies. You would at Joe Rogan just had a great pizza. That's what you did. I mean, it wasn't this thing where you got to express yourself in 240 whatever characters. And we're in a different world now. And I think this different world needs some different examination about what the ability to communicate online is. And this is an important point because Alex Jones made some crazy video after our conversation that I had with him yesterday where he was saying that I'm going to war against censorship and a war against YouTube. I'm not doing any of those things. I made this deal with Spotify.
Vis-a-vis the Spotify thing.
Yeah,
Okay.
I made the deal with Spotify because it's a great company and it's a great deal. And I'm excited to be in a partnership with a company as opposed to like a company that I just put my stuff up on their platform, whether it's Apple or YouTube. I don't like that YouTube censors things. I don't like that they do that like with those doctors in Bakersfield. But I'm not at war with them. I'm not at war with anybody. And I'm not.
Okay.
I don't envy them their position. I don't think it's smart to censor practicing doctors when they have differing opinions. I think we need to find out who's right. And I think the way you find out who's right is you get people who are experts and they disagree. There's Nobel laureates out there, and I've watched several videos that are talking about this lockdown and that it's not a good idea. There's people that believe in herd mentality versus immunizations or vaccines, and I don't know who's right. And I would like them to all be able to discuss it equally and openly. That said, I don't envy Twitter. I don't envy YouTube. I don't envy any of these people. The idea of trying to manage this in real time while it explodes and takes over the way human beings communicate over a period of a decade, just like that. That's so instantaneous. And mistakes have been made. And in my opinion, when it comes to the way things are censored and the way these mistakes, particularly on Twitter, far favor the left. And they're not balanced. Like there's some horrible things that people on the left say about people on the right, and it's nothing. It just gets washed away. But when the people do it who are on the right about people on the left, they get banned. It's not fair. And when things aren't fair, one side has a better argument that they're being censored and that there's some sort of a conspiracy. And it divides people even more. It strengthens the hate. Instead of like, I think most people, the vast majority, 70, 80%, are reasonable people that you could have a conversation with if you were in front of them one-on-one. When they don't feel like they're a part of the conversation, or when they speak their side and their stuff gets deleted or removed or put into some shadow ban category, it's fucking infuriating for people. And it's not good for all of us as a community. And I think that is the burden that these places like YouTube or Twitter, they have to shoulder this burden. And I don't know how to do it. I don't know. I mean, Republicans have one perspective. There's many people like yourself that have the perspective like, listen, it's their company. Should not they be able to make their own rules? I think they're too big. I think they're too big for that now. And I think that it's in this position where it literally is a part of who we are as human beings. The ability to express ideas and communicate is so critical right now. And as we're evolving and as we're evolving our culture and our civilization, discourse is so important. It's a giant part of being a human being in 2020. And I don't think it should be just flippantly removed from people.
So my personal view is very similar to yours in terms of, short of like illegal content and really very specific things. My instinct is leave it up and let the sort of let people evaluate it. Let people publish counterpoints. That's my personal view. Now, the conservative view on this is, if this cake baker doesn't want to bake a cake because of who you want to marry, you don't do anything to the baker. You just go and, the market will, if there's a demand for those types of cakes, for those types of weddings, bakers will enter the market and that's it. If you apply that here, and we'll get to the differences in a second. If you apply that here, if the James Woodses want to say stuff and a whole bunch of people want to hear that stuff, why don't they just go and make their platform and bring everybody over? It sounds like a great business, right?
Yeah, it does sound like a great business. It's way harder to do. Way harder to do than just do it. I mean, to say, why don't you make another Twitter? Well, there would be 1,000 Twitters. It's obviously very difficult. No one's ever been able to do it. It's not something you're talking about something that takes an enormous amount of resources. It's not that.
Yes.
It's not that simple.
It's not that simple. But
everybody already does.
Though.
But everybody already does use Twitter. So I think the question really is: does Twitter have a responsibility for fair and even treatment? And I'm sure you've seen some of those James O'Keefe, Project Veritas videos where they have secret cameras filming executives talking about how to censor conservative people.
I've seen a little bit of it. What I do remember is from the Planned Parenthood era, where what they published was pretty dramatically dishonest from what I recall. But I've not seen the one you're referring to specifically.
That was a long time ago, was it? How long ago was that? The Planned Parenthood stuff?
Was it 5 years?
Oh, are you talking about the Acorn stuff? The stuff where they brought in a pimp to try to get money for opening up a brothel?
It's been so long that the details escape me, but I remember that incident. I've not really seen anything recently that they've done.
Whenever you have deceptive editing, the problem is even if in the future you don't do that anymore, it's like everyone's always going to remember that you did do something.
Yes.
You did do something that wasn't straightforward, cut and dry, no emotion journalism. Just here are the facts. Planned Parenthood awarded $2 million in lawsuit over secret videos. Interesting. That's not good. Yeah. That's my big memory when you mentioned that organization. But so I think that let's say we agree about something needs to be done. Once you're at a certain level, you enter a new category and some kind of regulation has to be done. Who does the regulation? When you look at redistricting, for example, this has been like a multi-decade thing where when Republicans are in power, they draw the districts in a way that's favorable to them. Democrats are in power. They take the opportunity to redraw districts that are favorable to them. You have these ideas of, okay, we'll have a commission with 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans, and together they'll figure out how the districts could be drawn fairly. How do you apply that? What the lesson from that? How do you apply it to, does the Trump administration decide what kind of content must be left up versus what can be removed? But then that administration gets replaced. Now the next administration says, here's how Twitter is supposed to operate. Like, how do you do it? It's a really good question. It's a really hard question. That's what I was saying. I don't envy those people.
Right.
I really like Jack Dorsey as a person. I really enjoy talking to him. I think he's a very thoughtful guy. And in discussing this with him, both on the show and off the show, they don't really know exactly how to handle these things. So they don't really know what the perfect solution is. And he's even proposed a Wild West Twitter and then a Twitter that's under some sort of moderation. And I don't know where they stand on that right now, but that was something he was actively bringing up. Like, let's have a Twitter where anything goes. You could, like Reddit in the early days, you could do whatever the fuck you wanted versus what they have now. But here's another example. When a person gets so big like Trump, you could do shit on Twitter that there's no way you could do. Right? Like, have you seen the recent thing where he's accusing Joe Scarborough of possibly being a part of a murder or something like that?
Yes, I saw that.
He's bringing up, apparently totally, I don't know the exact details of the story, but it been investigated. It had nothing to do with it. It was just someone he worked with. And Trump he's putting out this thing particularly just to try to target Joe Scarborough, get his fans to go nutty and fuck with him. And that's a weird way of that's a right-wing guy who is literally the top right-wing guy, right? So right-wing bias doesn't seem to apply totally, negative bias when it comes to the president. And the president, when you get to a certain level, like, you could just do shit like that. Like, you could just threaten North Korea. Like, he could say, we have the best missiles, we'll fuck you up. Like, he could tweet that. He could tweet, hey, buddy, I'm glad you fake your death, and I know you're still alive, but I just want you to know we got the best missiles and we'll fuck you up. If he tweeted that, like, whoa.
But this is not really unique to Twitter in the sense that if you look at our justice system, there's sort of like the justice system for the elites, and then for other people, the focus on street crime instead of white-collar crime. I mean, this exists in a lot of different places. What can a really big business get away with versus what can a small business sometimes get away with?
Sure.
So I don't think that's different. One of the things I'm thinking about is, what's the main point of Twitter? Like, Twitter is a publicly traded corporation. So at this point, is it fair to say that the main point of Twitter is to be profitable and deliver a return to shareholders? Because if it is, all the stuff we're talking about how we would like to see it operate is sort of irrelevant, because they now have this fiduciary responsibility to just make money.
Right. What do you think Twitter's worth? Like if someone wanted to come over and buy it, what if the government bought Twitter and just applied the First Amendment to Twitter? What if the government said, listen, you guys are kicking ass, great job. However, you're basically a public utility for communication of ideas, and it's imperative that for liberty and for the ability for people to have free speech, everyone has to have access to this. And so when you go to, maybe it's like one of those things, you go to jail for a horrible felony, you lose your ability to vote. Maybe you go to jail for something, you lose your ability to tweet, I mean, could it be 300 billion? I have no idea. I wonder how much it is. I mean, how much are they spending on these goddamn stimulus packages? I wonder if they could probably buy it cheap right now, too. I mean, I don't think Twitter really makes money either.
Trillion.
I don't think it makes money. I think Twitter is one of those weird situations where it's worth something, but I don't know if it actually does. I don't think it's in the profitable area, right? I don't think it's
Maybe
making. Is it? Didn't you? When we talked, Jamie and I talked about this fairly recently. Yeah, it's complicated. Some things make sense, like Google makes sense, right? They use Google ads, they make a shitload of money. YouTube makes sense. It's profitable. It all makes sense. Twitter's like, where's the money coming from? Like, it's so valuable, and it's such a useful tool. But how do they make money?
I mean, literally there are ads on Twitter as well, right? Boosted posts, promote advertisements, et cetera. I have no idea how much money they're making from that versus what is the value of the user base.
Wasn't there a point recently where a very, very conservative investor bought a giant chunk of Twitter and was thinking about kicking out Jack Dorsey? Wasn't that something that was brought up really recently?
I don't know about that.
You remember that, Jamie? That was a situation, right?
Once, but I don't know if that's how it went down.
Like, fairly recently, someone just bought a controlling stake or a large stake. Look, man, I just think...
Is there anyone you would trust to regulate Twitter and YouTube and Facebook? Like, who would do it?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't think it should be one person either. I think it's also president. Like, being the president, I don't think she should be the president of Twitter. I really think it might be wise for all of us to consider it like a public utility.
You would socialize Twitter.
Yeah, I'd give it to Bernie.
That's incredible.
I think something that has that kind of power when it comes to expression, It's valuable for human beings. I would never want to take it away from the people that own it, obviously. But I just think as a concept that we should consider that what we have here with something like Twitter, or even maybe there's a good argument for YouTube as well, that what these new abilities to express yourself are, they're incredibly important in terms of the process of our culture, the process of going over ideas and evolving those ideas. There's no better way to do that than open communication. There's no better open communication than Twitter and YouTube. Like in terms of regular people, you could start a YouTube video right now on your phone. I could just set the phone up here, press record, and start talking, and then upload it, and bam, my thoughts could be available to anybody. And I think that's so valuable. It's so important in terms of our ability to go back and forth with ideas. And we're changing those ideas. Like obviously, the way we thought about life in 1960 is very different than the way we think about life today. And a lot of that comes from discourse. A lot of that comes from discussion and the evolution of these ideas. Jamie has something. Hold on a second.
Yeah, I think there was a potential corporate takeover that tried to maybe happen, but they made an agreement to not do it.
Twitter reaches deal with activist fund that wanted Jack Dorsey out. They made a deal. They met on Fuck Island, and they all, no.
Well, listen, I mean, I couldn't agree more strongly with you about the importance of these platforms. My entire business is built on them. I mean, I'd have no business if it weren't for these platforms. I think the difficulties are, what are the standards that are applied? And I also, I don't want to sound like one of these free market right-wingers, but what's the legal base? You would have to first establish a legal basis. You would have to establish law that says, once you have this number of users or this number of page views or whatever, you now are bound by this new set of laws, and that is complex, to say the least.
It's very complex. And I have no idea how one would even begin, and how long the process of figuring out what the rules should be, how long it would take before we all agreed on that. But I think that would be another great argument for the ability to express yourself, because in forming these laws, we would want to hear all perspectives from people that have been harmed by social media and Twitter mobs and shit like that, and what should be done about that. And the same thing could be said about YouTube as well. I think, but one thing that no one can deny is how significant these tools are, whether it's Twitter or YouTube or any new one that comes out, whether it's TikTok or whatever. They're really powerful. There's something to them that's unprecedented in the history of humanity. And we can't just apply the old rules to them. It just doesn't make sense. I don't think it's good for us. When I have talked to conservative people about this, if you're not accustomed to it, if you're not accustomed to feeling like you're censored and you're angry, you don't know what it's like until you're around these people. And then you see their frustration and their anger and their fury at Twitter for doing that and for censoring voices that are similar to their perspectives, instead of just letting the process take place like it's always has been. It's just in a different form, the process of being able to talk through ideas.
One of the risks of this is that once you assert a right to a platform, to exist on a platform, that supersedes Twitter or YouTube's ability to say, for whatever reason, because they're a company that can have terms and conditions, and they say, we just don't want this. If YouTube was determined that they don't want gardening content on YouTube, I can't think of a legal reason why they can't say no gardening content. I mean, as long as they're not, by virtue of banning gardening content, banning people on the basis of membership in some protected class or something like that, right? Like if all gardeners were of a certain race,
right,
you could make the case that by proxy, by banning gardening content, they're banning people of a certain race. I don't know how you prevent that from then being applied elsewhere. Like, what other platforms would people have a right to? And this gets to speakers who say, I was censored because a certain school wouldn't have me to speak there. It's like, well, hold on. You don't have a right to speak at any particular school. Schools can make decisions about what they want and what they don't want, as long as you're not being discriminated against based on your identity. is it not sort of the same thing with YouTube? Like, what is the legal basis for saying they can no longer make these decisions?
Well, there's a big difference. First of all, a school is a single destination that's a physical place, right? So you can decide, this is a conservative school. We don't want people coming over here and talking about this, or this is a very progressive school. We don't want to have someone from the KKK come here and tell us how all races are not equal. That's a very different thing. When you're doing something like YouTube, the real question is it just a business? Is it just a business that's owned by people and they have the right to do whatever they want? Or is at least, you're on YouTube, you're called a partner, right? They refer to you as a partner. David Pakman is a YouTube partner, right?
Yeah.
But and in some ways you are, right? Because you put out a lot of content. You're huge. You put out a lot of content, and that content is an integral part of, look, they have a progressive news sort of empire, really, when you really stop and look about, and homemade shows like yours, there's many of them that you could watch. Kyle Kalinske and Jimmy Dore, and all these folks are doing these shows basically from scratch, right? There's no large production company behind it or any of the things that. So they've got this whole empire of. You're a part of it. You're part of this whole news empire, and there's many categories, but what they are is not as simple as just a business. They are a business, but what they all are as well, with all the executives, all the people that YouTube as an entity is one of the most powerful tools for expression the world has ever known. So if you have this incredibly powerful tool for expression, at what point in time, or when are you able to deny people the use of that thing, and why? And what is freedom of expression if it doesn't apply to these new tools? What is the First Amendment if it doesn't apply to these new tools? If someone can come along and say, hey, I know you're a doctor and a practicing physician, but I'm 28 and I live in Palo Alto, and I say, fuck you because I believe in the WHO and I don't believe in you, and I'm just going to delete your video, and it seems to me that I followed the rules that YouTube has set forth about, if you don't agree with the WHO and you're giving some sort of contrary coronavirus information, delete. And I don't think that's wise. I think that's a very, very complicated issue that should be debated publicly and discussed publicly, whether or not these people have the right to be heard. And this is just one example that we keep bringing up, but there's many different kinds of things that fit along those lines. When you just want to ban all conspiracy theories, air quotes, the problem with conspiracy theories is, first of all, the word as a pejorative was created to try to steer people away from the Kennedy assassination, which is like one of the greatest conspiracies of all time. Some people did that. Whether it was Lee Harvey Oswald by himself, I highly doubt it. I think there's probably other people involved. I think it was a conspiracy. So calling that a conspiracy. I don't know enough
about this.
I know too much about it. I know too much about it. We could spend the rest of the day discussing that. Let's not. But my point is,
the First Amendment, though. I don't think the First Amendment is in play here because you're not talking about the government when you talk about YouTube.
Well, I think we should revise the First Amendment. This is what I'm saying. I think freedom of expression used to be I can't infringe upon your right to express yourself. But that was like yelling on a fucking Apple box. What you did when that was created, other than writing something in print or yelling something in a public square, there weren't a lot of ways to express yourself. Now, the most powerful way the world has ever known has come along to express yourself, and that's social media. That's YouTube and Twitter. And what are those things, and how much of a responsibility do the people who own those things have to adhere to the fundamental ideas that got us to this republic in the first place? And I think there's a real good argument that they're more powerful than simply just a company, that they have this amazing ability to get information out, and that this is, it should certainly be profitable. I don't deny them their profitability. They've made an amazing thing. They've created something that we all benefit from. They should make a shitload of money. But I think we should really be careful about who gets to use this and who doesn't get to use this. Just because someone says something that you disagree with that get other people to also agree with them doesn't mean they should be shut down. If you don't agree with what they're saying, if you don't like what they're saying, you probably shouldn't view it or listen to it or read it. You should probably find something else or examine why you don't like it. And this is where thinking comes in. This is where critical thinking and discussion comes in. And this is a huge part of managing a community, of managing a civilization. So one of the biggest parts of managing this civilization, this kind of discourse, is limited. And it's limited and censored, and people can arbitrarily decide to just remove you from it. Do you know the Zuby story? Do you know what happened with Zuby?
I only vaguely.
Zuby is he's an entertainer, a rapper out of the UK. Great guy, wonderful guy. Doesn't even swear. Very religious guy. He was in a discussion with someone on Twitter. Didn't know if that was a male or a female or what they prefer to be mentioned as, what their pronouns are. But they said, "I bet I have sex with more women than you." And he writes, "Okay, dude." That's all he writes. And he gets suspended from Twitter. And he asked them to review it. They reviewed it and upheld it. They're like, yes, this is a good suspension. You can't just say, "Okay, dude," to someone. That kind of stuff is crazy, right? I'm sure you know the Meghan Murphy story, where she said she's in an argument with someone over trans rights versus radical feminist rights. And, she's what you call a trans exclusionary radical feminist. And she says a man is never a woman. This is what she said. She doesn't believe that transgender people should be able to have a say in traditional women's issues. And so she gets banned for life for that. She basically said an opinion on something. A man is never a woman, though. They asked her to take it down. She took a screenshot of it and then put the screenshot up. She took it down, and she's obviously being rebellious. But should that keep her from being able to use that platform? No, you should be able to debate that statement. You should be able to refute that. If you want to be angry at her, tell her what you think. Tell her what's wrong with it. Tell her what's hurtful about it. But you banning someone for that, it sends a ripple of self-censorship that changes the discourse and makes you feel like you're oppressed. Makes you feel like that the overlords who watch over the social media platforms, they have the final say and power, and it might not align with my ideas, and there's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah, my view personally essentially lines up with yours in terms of my tolerance of speech. I still think that there's a huge issue and hypocrisy here where you have large swaths of people that are only in favor of this type of regulation.
Oh, you're right.
Because they believe that it benefits them based on their biases. And they don't want the regulation when it comes to, like I said,
gun control,
business, everything else. There's another hypocrisy, which I think is important. When you talk about net neutrality, there's this debate. Is the internet so necessary and ubiquitous now that it should be like the phone and like electricity, just a straight up utility?
Right. Yeah.
If you believe YouTube, which is a piece of the internet, should warrant this degree of additional regulation, how can you not say that the infrastructure that carries it obviously should be democratized and treated like a public utility? And yet you have a ton of people who want to regulate tweets, but they don't think that at this point the internet is so important that it should be a public utility. How do you square that?
That's a really good question. I think there's a way to balance it out where everyone has access to it, but if you want really hardcore, high bandwidth access, it's very expensive. You pay for it differently. Sort of like how in places that have public health care, they have the option for a private specialist that's really good at certain surgeries, or something along those lines. That you could pay for it as long as everybody has access to it, but you don't have access to it the way that maybe, say, a business would need, like a really fat pipe with a lot of bandwidth. It's a good question, though. But I think what you nailed earlier about discussions for regulation is so important because it does highlight the hypocrisy that people have with ideas that are controversial. And one of the things that they feel when it comes to whether it's the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, whatever it is, they want it. This is what's written down. It's in. We're not changing it. It's that way forever. Whether it's the 14th Amendment, whatever the fuck it is, pick an amendment. They just, nope, written down. That's it. That's what it is. And you're right that when it comes to something like social media where there isn't really a precedent, now they want regulation. They want the government to come in and step in because it doesn't favor what their ideas are. I see that there's some hypocrisy in that, but I also favor regulation. So I favor in that regard or favor regulation. I favor a regulation in a lot of ways. I think I've had these discussions with many people where they let the market decide. I'm like, That's okay. A lot of people get fucked over when you just let the market decide that eventually things even out, and sometimes
it's
maybe
almost
not
a
even.
cliche.
Yes.
It's almost a cliche at this point, because
I
even
agree.
a lot of times that people say that, they don't really want a free market.
Right.
They want a free market until, who could have seen the pandemic coming? Let's give cash to all of these 10 types of businesses all of a sudden. And I'm not saying I'm against that, but I'm saying let's, instead of pretending to be for one thing until you clearly need a different one, let's recognize these systems are more fragile than we believe them to be.
Yes.
And let's set that up all along to prevent something so acute from going wrong.
Yes. Very good point. And I think this is what we talked about earlier, that we hope happens out of this pandemic, is that we have a greater understanding of some things are out of our control, and we should be prepared as a community, as a large community. We should be prepared to help each other. And I think that can be done. I really do. And I think we could shift in that direction. And that's what I really enjoyed about some of the concepts that Andrew Yang had about universal basic income. Like saying, like, look, we need to take into consideration that this change is probably going to hit us, and it's going to hit us hard, and we got to be prepared. And, you know, the way he called it, I believe he referred to it as a freedom dividend. And so he gave it a different spin. You know, this is something you earned by being a part of this country. Like, we're going to have to adjust some of these hardline values that we have in terms of what people are responsible for and what people aren't. My argument has always been, I hate that pull yourself up by your bootstraps shit. I hate it. It drives me crazy, because not everybody is in the same situation from the start. You don't come out, you're not born into the same family. You're not born into the same community. You're not born into the same stresses and troubles and crime and gangs and this and that and abuse and sexual abuse and physical abuse, and it's not an even playing field. It's just not. So all this, you need to get your shit together. Like, no, we need to help people get their shit together. And we need to figure out if we looked at the number one problem, and this is, again, going back to Bernie Sanders, the number one problem with people that are young, that are coming up, is having opportunity, having health care, having safety, having a place where you actually have a fighting chance to thrive. And my perspective is, if you're a person that thinks America as a team, that we are America and I'm proud to be an American, well, what's the best way to strengthen an America? Less losers, less people that have a shitty hand of cards from the jump. That's what we should be concentrating on more than anything. There's a corresponding number, as unemployment rises, there's more people dying because of heart attacks, suicide, depression, all these different factors. You could apply that to poverty. You could apply that to despair. You could apply that to growing up in an environment where it seems like there's no hope. You can only ask someone to hold their breath and swim for so long before they just want to give up. And that's what you see with a lot of people in our culture today, in our society, in these inner cities. That's not addressed. People, one after the other, people run for office and they don't address those things, especially run for the top office. Bernie was the only one who was. He was the only one who was addressing it. So that was why I was for Bernie Sanders. He to me, represented some revolutionary change in our perception of what our society is and what our obligations are as good citizens.
Yeah, deaths of despair, I think, it's a category that encompasses all of that stuff. So I was just reminded of this because we went back to Bernie. So are you voting Biden or are you voting Trump, or do you know what you're doing?
I don't know what I'm doing, man. I think I'm probably going to vote independent.
Really?
I think California's going to go. It's going to go Democrat no matter what.
Yeah.
Who knows? If Biden has some lady who's badass who tells him sit down, shut the fuck up, I got this. Maybe I'll be more inclined to vote for him based on his vice president choice. I don't know.
Do you feel that, like, from my perspective, 70% of what you seem to be highlighting with Bernie, maybe 70%, you would get with Biden?
I'm very cynical. I'm very cynical. Yeah, I'm very cynical about that. I think so many of these choices, like even just having a female president, they're done for perceptions, and they're done to. He's appealing to the people that want him in power in the first place. Those old guard Democrats, and the business of the Democratic Party. It's a giant business. The whole thing is getting control, and there's some social carrots that are dangling out there at the end of the stick that we would like to think that, having someone in there that's going to vote left in terms of Supreme Court justices and things along those lines would help us all tremendously. But I don't know. I'm cynical. The way this whole Bernie Sanders thing went down, I'm cynical about that. How they all dropped out right before Super Tuesday, and it was Bernie versus Biden, and there's so much of it that I felt like there's so much coordinated shit that he had to endure from the DNC in 2016 that he was enduring similar shit running into the 2020 election. I don't have a lot of faith in the same standard institutions changing things for the better. I just don't have a lot of faith. I think
that I guess I don't know. I'm thinking I don't have kids, but if I did, all frustrations with the DNC, the coordinated dropouts, all of that stuff. It's just for me so simple where if Trump gets to pick the next Supreme Court justice, that could affect your kids' kids in horrible ways. Whereas if Biden gets to pick the next Supreme Court judge, that alone, and these other 250 judges that Trump selected that we don't really hear about, but that make way more decisions, climate aside, I think Biden, you would agree with more on tax policy. I think you'd be more with, all these different issues. Just the judges part would impact society for 20, 30 years. And that just seems so huge.
It would be huge. Yeah. And we should probably consider whether or not that makes sense, whether or not Supreme Court justices should be lifetime appointees.
Agree.
Does that make sense? And should it be so significant that you're willing to ignore everything else just because you want someone in the Supreme Court that aligns with your politics, because they're not going to be there for a couple of years? They're going to be there until essentially they either retire or die. That's a weird thing to have. It's a weird amount of it's almost like there's something that happens to professors when they get tenure where they can kind of get away with wacky shit and do whatever they want. It gets real weird. And I think that whenever you get people in a position where they don't ever have to worry about getting fired, obviously a scandal, they murder somebody or something, but they're appointed for life. I think, and they have immense power. It's just, I don't know. I'm not a law student or a lawyer, but is that really the best way to do it? It doesn't.
Yeah, I tend to favor term limits for Supreme Court justices. The counterpoint, which is not a crazy counterpoint, is if they know that eventually on the tail end of this thing, they've got to go and get a job, it could influence their rulings in cases, right? If you will very often see cases where it could be dealing with an industry that would be the likely industry you would work at after you leave the Supreme Court.
Yeah. That
would be something you would want to eliminate. But I see both sides of it.
I see both sides of it too. It seems to me also to have a president that gets to choose the Supreme Court judges. It's all the other shit he has to do too. That should be the only job he does. If he was just going to pick Supreme Court judges, he should mull over that for years. He should have stacks of paperwork in his office going over. First of all, he should be a lawyer. Like Obama would be uniquely qualified for that gig. Hillary would be uniquely qualified. You should be a fucking lawyer that understands what you're actually going to vote on and what the implications of giving this person this gig is going to be. And also, wouldn't it be logical if we're just assuming that this is probably a terrible idea because it would result in big stalemates, but wouldn't it be great if we're admitting that there's only two parties? We kind of are. There's a third. There's independent and green and all that, but there's two parties, right? There's conservative and liberal. Wouldn't it be great if there was half and half? 5 of each or 4 of each, or pick a number. If you're going to have a Supreme Court, wouldn't it be great if it was equally representative of?
Well, by definition, that cannot happen because in order to avoid stalemates, you got to have an odd number.
Right. Yeah, but maybe just one. That one is what happens. The president gets to pick that one. So if you're a Republican, you get one. You have one that tips it towards your side. One. But it's a terrible idea. I'm a moron and don't listen to me. But wouldn't it make more sense to have equal representation of both sides when it comes to complex issues that's going to affect the entire country? It shouldn't just be a simple matter of this one guy as the president. He gets to just appoint all these right-wing Jesus bangers and they come in and burn all abortion clinics. It shouldn't be that simple.
Now, that's interesting because so you're pro-choice. Do
Yes.
you really want it to be mandated that half the court is against abortion? Like, why would that be good?
Again, whenever it comes to abortion, there's one thing that you keep bringing up, and that you keep bringing up pro-choice. You keep bringing it up, and it's
I brought it up because you mentioned abortion.
Right. But you brought it up earlier too.
Yes.
It's one of those when it comes to picking a Supreme Court. That's like the number one thing. Should you?
Yeah.
I mean, I hate to say it this way. Should you be able to abort a baby? It's what it is, right? Or a fetus, or the bundle of tissue before it's ever really anything. Should you be able to do that? And it's so crazy that is like one of our number one considerations. Should someone be able to infringe on your rights as a human being to tell you have to carry this baby, and then you have to either put it up for adoption or raise it? Like, whew. Like, what a uniquely human conundrum that is, and a conversation that is. Because, as we discussed earlier, everybody gets very disturbed when it gets older. When you're dealing with 5 and 6 months, everybody has a problem with it, almost everybody. But when it's early on, it's less and less. It's one of those uniquely human things where we're all just like, whoa, that's a messy discussion. It's a messy problem.
It's not unique to abortion, though. I mean, if you think about a speed limit, right? Yep. I mean, you get engineers and they say the speed limit here is going to be 35. Does that mean when it's dry, 40 is unsafe? No. Does that mean if it's icy, 35 is safe? You've probably got the fact that there is an arbitrary nature to it often gets you into a philosophical black hole where people end up saying, you just can't have it because it's not clear in the way we would like it to be clear. And I think we don't want to fall into that kind of philosophical black hole because it's not unique to abortion that exists.
Yeah, you could make a good argument about being something that you could apply to a lot of different things, but abortion is so emotional because when you talk to the pro-life people and they're screaming that you're killing a baby, like there's nothing else like that sort of has the consequences of on one side, people looking at a woman's right to choose, and then the other side looks at it, you're killing a baby. Like, whoa, like that is a really polarizing and complex issue. But I agree with you about the speed limit thing, and the other problem with the speed limit thing is you're turning cops into glorified revenue collectors because they're out running around giving people tickets and collecting money for going too fast. Like, that's not what they're supposed to be there for. I mean, for sure, if someone's driving unsafe, they should do that, but they shouldn't be waiting to catch people going 3 miles an hour over the 45 limit. And also, like, what kind of a car do you have? Because if you have a 1965 Buick and it doesn't stop at all, like you hit the brakes and it skids for like 15 feet before it even starts to brake, your car's dangerous. Your car's dangerous, probably even going 35 miles an hour. If you got an old tank of a car with shitty brakes and, those cars, they're not designed to go fast, like in comparison to today's cars at all. Like maybe you shouldn't even be allowed to drive those. When you see someone with like one of them classic cars, like Jay Leno drives all around Burbank, like, hey man, you can't even, those brakes barely work on that fucking piece of shit. But if you have a Tesla, like my God, man, those things are super fast. They're super comfortable and safe. The brakes are amazing. Like there's modern cars today that you can make the argument that 55 miles an hour is preposterous. Like I know all around Massachusetts, I used to live there. The speed limit was crazy. 55 miles an hour is maddening. You just want to eat your steering wheel. You're like, this is going to take so long.
When was that? I don't even remember when the speed limit was 55.
Sammy Hagar, bro. I can't drive 55. Don't you remember? Do you remember that?
Maybe I'm too young. I remember 65. I remember 65.
How old are you, David?
36.
Yeah, I'm ancient. I'm 52. And when I was a kid, Sammy Hagar, before he was even in Van Halen, he had this song, I Can't Drive 55. And
yeah. No, I know the song.
So
I know the song.
angry.
I just thought, I don't know when it was that slow in Massachusetts.
Oh, man. Well, when I lived in there, I moved out of Massachusetts in probably 92, 91, 92, and it was still 55 then. When I used to drive to Connecticut for gigs, you'd get busted all the time. These fucking guys be hiding behind bushes with radar. We'd have radar detectors you hang from your steering wheel, or your rear view mirror. Remember those things? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I used to have one. Didn't work at all, but I had one.
But yeah, there's, I mean, Montana had no speed limits. Montana was like, fuck you, until the federal government said, listen, You gotta, if you want money from us, you gotta do something. You gotta have speed limits. So they came up with some wacky, like 85 mile an hour speed limit up there. But that's also, it's a place where there's just not that many folks. It's big, wide open stretches of land. It's not like driving 85 miles an hour through downtown Boston.
No. Are you like out and about a lot right now with what's going on with the virus?
I mean, not really. I went to Florida for the UFC. That was really weird. That was last weekend or the weekend before last. That was very strange. Wearing a mask everywhere and everyone else has a mask on. But once we got to the actual event, it was just strange because there was no audience. The fight had no crowd. And then I came back home, and mostly I've been just coming here to the studio and going home. I've actually, aside from being freaked out and all the anxiety and being sad that people are suffering, and I myself have enjoyed the time off and enjoyed the ability to reflect and to just think about like what is important in life and what is important in terms of how I spend my time and how critical health is, that it's not just a luxury or a vanity, that health and exercise, it's imperative. And I mean, I beat people over the head with that maybe too much, but I think it's so goddamn important. And that, to me, that's really been hammered home to me about this pandemic. Love, friendship, how important my friendships are, how I value them so much. My obligation in doing this thing, it's like I want to express a beneficial idea. I want to express ideas in a way that maybe people could get something out of it. I want it to be entertaining, but I want people to get something out of it, And I think that's all been highlighted, and what a unique position I'm in, and how fortunate I am, and what obligation comes with that fortune. That's all been really highlighted by this pandemic.
Yeah, I just feel so lucky that my job doesn't depend on me driving somewhere, on some boss, whatever. The community that, people are home watching stuff, and for that reason, shows like these are particularly important right now. But also that responsibility thing about, I really need to make sure I'm informing people about what's actually going on. Yeah. I don't want to be spreading disinformation. The feeling of that responsibility I've always had it, but it feels particularly acute right now because of what's going on.
Yeah, and it should. And, David, it's interesting. We were talking about this earlier, but your show couldn't exist in any other time, and nor could mine. And we're very, very similar in that way. If you had someone standing over you, telling you what to do, or, hey, David, here's the data we've got from the polls. They don't like it when you talk about this, or they say not to talk about that, and the sponsor wants you to change the way you're dressed, and that kind of shit, you would never become you. And I think one of the reasons why shows like yours resonate with people is because it's very obvious that no one is telling you what to do. You're just a guy who has your perspectives, and you're a brilliant guy, and you have very interesting thoughts on things, but these are home brewed thoughts. Like, you've thought about these. These are not things that are being handed to you on a printed sheet by the network executives. And that's what makes what you do and what I do so interesting. Is that it resonates to be like, people can clearly see I'm a moron. So if this moron is be able to talk to all these people and have these intense conversations, like, there's not really a barrier of entry that we once thought it was. To be a person who has that kind of an audience, you used to have to be vetted, and you used to go through a long process. There was a lot of other people in consideration. You had to play games and politicking, and you had to be chosen. You don't have to be chosen anymore. You just have to do it and get better at it. And I feel so fortunate to be in the situation that I'm in, where this is happening, and to have this ability to just do a show, to not have to talk to anybody, to be able to just go and have conversations with whoever I want, whether it's you or whoever, anyone.
Yeah.
I think it's...
Yeah, my hope is, like, when we look back at this, whenever it's done, that I can just feel good about the work that happened during this time, right?
Yes.
Because I think it's going to be a phase where we'll kind of remember the beginning, middle, and end of it, and I don't know when the end of it is going to be, but I don't want to feel like the time was squandered in any way.
No, I don't think it is, man. I think perspective-wise, I think we're all going to benefit from this. The real problem is people with businesses. The real problem is people that didn't do anything wrong and everything's taken away from them. And I feel fucking terrible for them. And if there's any way we could save them and do something, I mean, I just don't know what the answers are. I don't know what the answers are medically. I don't know what the answers are. I mean, in terms of managing our economy from here out, I don't. But, man, it's a fucking weird time. It's one of the weirdest times. Like sometimes I'll just be driving down the street and I'll have forgotten that we're in the middle of a pandemic, and I'll see some person with a mask on. I'm like, oh yeah, the world's fucking haywire right now. I forgot. We're all afraid to touch each other, and everyone's far apart, and you get hand sanitizer you're squirting every 5 minutes on yourself. It's just the weirdest time of my life.
Yeah, my biggest concern is that all the stuff that we figured out we weren't ready for, we learn nothing from it, and then just the next one of these happens and we're just as unprepared and things go just as haywire. That would be like the biggest waste, and I fear that is a good possibility.
That's a big fear, and it's also like when in terms of money to allocate, what's left? Like after the stimulus packages, after all this stuff that we're doing, what is going to be left? How much money is there going to be to try to restart everything? Do they have enough money to really put together another pandemic response team and do a better job with it? To really fund research on the flu and various viruses and to find out what's going on? I know there's talk about these things, about picking up these programs and really stepping up. We can only hope.
There is absolutely. I mean, listen. $6 trillion already. Prevention is so much cheaper than emergencies. It's a fraction of the cost. Obviously, pandemic response team never should have been disbanded. It would cost pennies on the dollar to what is being spent right now, no doubt.
It's crazy when you go back and listen to Bill Gates' TED Talk in 2015 talking about the possibility of a pandemic and wiping everybody out. And then 5 years later, you see it happen. And you're like, nobody listened. Nobody listened.
But how crazy is it that people are now Bill Gates is the bad guy? I've got people I went to high school. I have people I went to high school with posting insane conspiracies about Bill Gates is the problem now to a lot of people.
How did that happen? Listen, help me there. Help me there with that one, because that one's weird. I was watching this video from Newport Beach or Huntington Beach where all these people are protesting Free California. They're running around, and this guy's got a megaphone. He's like, Bill Gates is the devil. Like, how did that happen? It's one of the weirdest memes. It's one of the weirdest, like, cultural memes. Like this thing has happened, that Bill Gates, this philanthropic billionaire who's literally like made toilets in Africa and spent millions of dollars to try to get people education and millions of dollars on all sorts of great social good. All of a sudden, he's a bad guy.
It's inconceivable. And the number of people I've just muted or unfriended that I personally know, I mean, it's not just random people on Twitter, but it's people I went to high school with who say he wants to profit from the vaccine, or he wants to use a vaccine to control the population, or, I mean, it's like, this
nanotech.
It's weaponized disinformation is what I call it.
Well, it's very prevalent. It's really interesting too, because like here's the problem. There is profit in vaccines. That's a problem. So like when someone looks for a conspiracy and they say something like Bill Gates, he just wants to profit on the vaccine, you can't say no one ever profits on vaccines. So that's a stupid idea. You go, well, how much is a vaccine worth and how much profit is there in vaccines? Then you look into it and you go, whoa, there's a lot of profit in vaccines. Shit. I wish there was none. I wish, they're making them just for the greater good of mankind, and it's not like people are buying private jets and Ferraris off that money. But look, everything where people do it and do it well seems to require incentive. And it's funny to me.
That's also a critique of the system, right? That's a critique of because it's not just vaccines.
But it's funny to me that people don't have a problem with that with capitalism. But the same people that would vote right and don't have a problem with the capitalism, maybe be anti-regulation, are angry that people make money off of vaccines. But
yes.
They're also angry because we're cynical and we wonder, okay, if they're making money off vaccines, would it be possible for them to incentivize doctors to vaccinate people more? Or if they got more people involved, they would make more money. Like, that is a problem in just human nature. When you can make more money. Okay, give me the reality.
The not vaccinating and having way more people to treat for stuff is way more profitable.
That's a good point. And it's also devastating to civilization, right? I mean, if they never came up with a fucking polio vaccine, how many people would be just a mess because of that and die because of that? Smallpox. You've seen those images of, I mean, I probably never saw them until the internet, of the images of what people look like when they were devastated by smallpox. It's horrifying. Yeah. Vaccines are important. My cynical nature comes up whenever there's anything where people can make a lot of money. It's not just vaccines. It's like anything, whether it's fracking. When I hear people talk about how safe fracking is, and then I remember Gasland, the documentary where they're lighting water on fire. I'm like, what? Yeah. It's tap water's not supposed to be flammable. Like, something's going on here, man. I mean, this place is in Pennsylvania where people can't live. They have to get out of their fucking house. They can't live. They can't wash themselves with the water. They can't drink it. They can't. They're worried about breathing in the fumes near their houses. I mean, it's devastating.
It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy, and that's I mean, that's a clear area where profit and not enough regulation are the recipe for disaster.
And oddly enough, an area where the right wing tends to poo-poo it. Oh, come on. Fracking has made this country a oil stronghold. You know, there's that argument, which I guess it kind of has, right? I mean, that's, again, a problem with humans. Life is so complicated. Being a human is so fucking complicated. There's so much to us.
How long do you think this will go?
I don't know. I'm worried about a second wave. The second wave concerns me, and I'm worried that could lead to shutdowns, that people are not going to be able to make it through, that made it through this one, or they barely made it through this one with their business, and then the second lockdown comes, and they lose everything. I'm also worried that people are going to lose their health and their life. I mean, I'm worried about both things. I'm worried about the second wave coming and people being ignorant to the possibility of it hitting, and then it does hit and it's devastating. Both those things are terrible, But again, my thinking is, if we're going to quarantine people, we really should make more of an effort to quarantine people who are sick and old. That seems to me to be a better way of handling it from here forward than quarantining all of us. I don't think that's tenable. I think maybe we could pull that off for a month or so, but I think after a while, the fucking wheels fall off, and I feel like that's where we are right now. So I think, as I said before, much more emphasis on health and your immune system and taking care of your body and being smart. Those things are underappreciated and critical.
Yeah,
but I don't know how long it's going to last.
I think the best scenario is a widespread vaccine by March, April 21, right? I mean, it seems like...
But would you jump right in with one of those mRNA vaccines?
Well, by the time unless I go out and buy one, by the time I get it, millions of people will have had it already. Like, I mean, it's going to be healthcare workers first and then the most vulnerable. By the time there's one available for me, unless I just figure out who I can buy it from, millions of people will have had it already.
At this point in the movie, the screen would go black and we'd open to David Pakman covered in dirt, carrying a club filled with spikes, running down the street with his friend trying to avoid the zombies. Because everybody got it, but by the time it got to you, they had already turned to zombies, and you couldn't afford it, and lucky you, now there's millions of zombies running through the streets of Boston trying to eat people.
We don't have to go into this, but I am doing some prepping now, and I have no clue what I'm doing.
What are you doing?
I looked up what are the 80, the 80-20 idea, right? So I just tried to figure out what's the stuff that will cover 80% of the scenarios. So it's 3 days of water. I don't need a month of water.
Right.
Some additional first aid supplies. But then I got into really weird stuff where I got convinced that I need a flat tire repair kit. And so I bought this thing, and then I looked at it and I was like, wait a second. I still need to pump up the wheel at the tire after I use this thing. And then I realized I've got AAA and a flat. Why did I buy a flat or a spare? Why did I buy a flat tire repair kit? So some of the stuff I bought made no sense at all.
That's actually wrong. That makes plenty of sense. First of all, you can get one that plugs in your cigarette lighter. That's an air compressor. Very easy.
Right.
And I got one of those. It's awesome. So that's you're covered there. Second of all, AAA, if a lot of shit goes down, they're going to be busy, man. and they might not be answering their phone, and you might be stuck in the middle of nowhere. No, a tire repair kit is good. Knowing how to feed yourself, that's good. Like having rice and beans, things that are easy to store and that last forever, that's really good. All that stuff's very important. But I got real super preppery at the beginning of this. I was real worried. The first couple of weeks, I was scared out of my fucking mind. I was like, this could just be, 10% of us are dead. People just dropping dead in the street left and right. I was really worried about it. Because, you hear the stories, the salacious, crazy, horrible stories are the ones that get the most press, whether it's whatever subject the subject is. And of course, when it comes to a pandemic, the ones that people want to hear about is there's a 28-year-old guy, he was a fitness instructor and now he's in a coma. Like, holy shit. Those ones that really scare the fuck out of you. Those were what you kept hearing. So, I'd wake up in the middle of the night thinking, does my breath feel short? And, and then also the anxiety kind of was keeping me from sleeping well. So then I have a Whoop strap that measures my sleep, and I checked the app, and I would look at my recovery, and it was like 13%. I was like, what the fuck? It's because I'm freaking out, because I'm up all night worrying about whether or not society's going to fall apart and everyone's going to die. So it took a while for me to relax. I guess like probably a couple weeks before I was getting like real consistent sleep and feeling much better. But I'm still very, very worried about what it's going to be like once things restart.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I thought 4 different times I had coronavirus, first of all, so that whole thing went on. But there's some stuff that is going to take a while to get back to, just like human interaction type things, right? I mean, I don't think there's not going to be a day where we say we're back to hugging and handshaking and sharing drinks and that type of stuff. Like some of this stuff will persevere for a long time.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. When I was at the UFC, I was shaking a lot of people's hands and hugging people, but they were all tested. Everyone was tested. So everyone had to walk around with a bracelet on that showed that they had been tested and tested that week. And so everyone was cleared right before we got there. So I was pretty sure everyone was fine. It just seemed so normal, all the friends that I've been working with for years. So I was shaking their hands and hugging them. And some people were critical of that. They were like, you got to stay away and social distance and all this. And I was like, when everyone's clear, like if we're all tested and everyone's testing negative, like why can't we act like normal again? Is it magically going to sneak into the building?
Somebody could be incubating it, right? Where, imagine if 3 of those people tested negative because they're incubating it. They got it on the flight there or something like that. I don't know.
Again, the horror movie. I think they didn't get on the flight there because everyone was tested once they arrived. But either way, yeah, I know what you're saying.
But I mean, like it could be in your system from the flight. You get a test 2 hours later, but the test is negative. But if you just wait 24 more hours, then that test would be positive.
All right, Dr. Pakman, you got me.
I don't know.
I don't know either, man. But I hope we go back to normal. I think people need touch and we need hugs.
Yeah.
And it weirds me out already when I see how scared people are of each other, walking down the same sidewalk and people cross the street so they don't go near you. It gives you a weird feeling. It's not optimal.
Dystopian.
Yeah. Listen, David, we just did 3 hours, if you can believe it or not.
Incredible.
I appreciate you, man. You're a very intelligent guy. I really enjoy your show. I like watching your clips. I love your well thought out perspective, and I think you're very valuable, especially in this crazy time we're living in.
I so appreciate it. 3 hours went by in an instant, and really appreciate talking to you again, having me back.
Next time, let's do it in person. I'm going to hug you. We're going to hug each other. We're going to get over our fears.
I hope so. I think we will.
All right, brother. Will you take care of yourself, man? Thank you again.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye.